Hello and welcome to Purely Academic, your potentially educational podcast. This is a special topic episode for July 2025. I'm Dr. Jonathan Lack. I am slower than a speeding bullet, far less powerful than a locomotive, and I am unable to leap tall buildings in a single, or frankly even multiple bounds.
Yes, and I'm Sean Chapman, high school English teacher by day, otaku by night, and I am most certainly a man of steel.
All right, so we are, as you can imagine, here to talk about Superman, the 2025 movie that came out last week, written and directed by James Gunn as part of the new DCU, and that is what we are just going to dive right into today. That is our whole topic. That is why we are here, because you know what? They finally made a fucking Superman movie, and we are here to talk about it. If you follow me at all online, you've read my review is up on Fade to Lack. It's been up for a couple days. I really, really liked this movie. So people know that. But Sean, what did you make of this film?
Yeah, I really liked it as well. It's a really good superhero movie and a very good Superman movie that is finally like a like comic book version of Superman, you know?
Yes.
It feels like the movie they should have made 12 years ago when Man of Steel came out. Like, it is the like I think the long and short of it, for my take on it, is it feels like it is a very good version of like a Marvel Studios style superhero movie, right? Like, it feels like James Gunn is doing the thing that he was brought over to do, which is to look at what did Marvel Studios do with their characters, and can you do that with the DC characters, while also not kind of, I think, going down some of the more dramatic pitfalls that Marvel Studios has found themselves in the more recent projects. But it gave me the kind of feeling I had watching something like the original Avengers movie. Just translated to Superman in his world and his cast of characters and the broader DC universe as well, right? You get your Metamorpho is in this fucking movie. Mr. Terrific is in this movie, that kind of stuff, while also delivering what feels like a very authentic vision of Superman that, if you're familiar with the character from both just kind of the roots of the character in the original Christopher Reeve movie and stuff like that, but also if you've seen the cartoon, if you've read a Superman comic book in your life, this is now a version of the character you can watch in a modern movie that reflects that. Whereas the last time they tried to do this with Man of Steel, that really was not the case with that film, and was a source of a lot of frustration for me at the time. And it is a huge relief to feel like, okay, we have like a good fucking Superman in a movie, finally, for the first time since Christopher Reeve did it.
Yeah, I think the Marvel comparison makes sense, although I also think this is, like, better than the average Marvel movie, certainly recently.
Sure, better than the average one, for sure. It's like, I would put it, it's like in that kind of upper tier of, like, Marvel Studios style movie.
I think Avengers is a good comparison, in that Avengers felt like a breath of fresh air where, like, oh my gosh, no one's done a comic book movie kind of like this before, and this feels like that too. One of the things that struck me is just how DC it is, because, like, I am on the, like, comic book spectrum much more of a DC fan. I have not read a ton of American comics in either direction, but I've engaged with way more DC content, like, obviously, all of the cartoon shows, but then, like, I also watched most of the CW Arrowverse shows, which are, like, I think in a very similar flavor to this, or the DC animated movies, particularly that decade they did that was all interconnected, that had, like, the Justice League Flashpoint Paradox and all of those kinds of movies, and this really felt like the version of DC I recognize and really appreciate, and that, like, felt super cool and authentic, because and honestly, the thing it also felt like is the Matt Reeves Batman movie. Like, tonally, it's very different, but I think they are we're having a very similar reaction here, which is like, hey, they made a Batman movie, and now we're like, hey, they made a Superman movie, and that's just, that's nice, because those are the two big DC heroes, and they've got those down, which is a good foundation to build on. If you've got those two, I feel like you can do the others after that, you know?
Yeah, and that's like the Marvel Studios thing of, like, that's what watching Iron Man and Captain America: The First Avenger and stuff like that felt like, including, like, the first Thor movie, which is a little bit rougher than those two. But, like, when you get to the scene in the Pocket universe or whatever, and you see the Cell and Metamorpho is there, that I got the same feeling of, like, oh, it's like in the original Thor movie when you have all the people grabbing their guns when Thor attacks the compound, and one guy goes, instead he grabs a bow, and it's Hawkeye, and that's the first time Hawkeye was in any of those movies. And there's the nonchalantness with which It just sort of exists in this larger universe of characters that you can just have Metamorpho be there, and it's cool. And you get a little exposition for people who don't know Metamorpho and his powers, making elements or whatever that is. But if you've seen the cartoons where he's a big character of those, or you know him from the comic books, like you have that sense of it's a very authentic representation of the things that are fun about the source material. And that's just not a thing that you ever particularly got with DC characters, other than like in a very different world where you had the original Superman movie, the original Tim Burton Batman movie. That is a certain kind of representation of the comic books from a very long time ago. But this feels like it is that more kind of modern take on a superhero from a more like a, you know, lived in world of modern superhero comic books. And yeah, it is like the Batman in that regard, tonally very different. But it is that sense of you are taking the character and doing authentic representation and bringing that to the screen and adapting that to the screen, rather than what it's often felt like with DC characters, where it's like you've taken a vague idea of what Batman is, or vague idea of what Superman is for like Man of Steel, but you just kind of made your own thing with it, which is what Batman Begins, and that version feels like that's what a Man of Steel feels like. Here it feels like if you have a love for Superman outside of like that very narrow, slim like margin of live action movies, you know him from other things. There's so much for you here as a fan of the character.
I mean, just the fact you're talking about some of the characters, like that this is a Superman movie with characters who were invented after 1978 when the original movie came out. Like, yes. None of the other Superman movies do that. Like, Superman Returns is stuck in 78, Man of Steel is General Zod, like, and this has, like, Mr. Terrific is a 90s character. Like, it's just, you know, and the Batman did this too, where it's like, oh, we can have new characters in our superhero movies and acknowledge that time didn't stop in 1978, which look, 1978 Superman, I think is still the best Superman movie, but yes. Like, we don't have to pretend that time stopped there. So, no, this is great. And I think, on top of everything you're saying, this also has the James Gunn touch of being a very tight script that I think, like, uses all those characters. Like, one difference, like, in the Hawkeye versus Metamorpho thing is Metamorpho is then a character who carries through and has a thematic arc and a payoff in this movie. And, like, that's something that, you know, James Gunn is just very good at in all of his films, is balancing all these things. And so, yeah, I love the scope of this movie. I love but like there's a scope, but there's also a tightness. You know, this is also the first Superman movie under 2.5 hours since Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. And I think that is very funny. And I appreciated it.
You wouldn't think that a Superman movie would need to be 2.5 hours long, but they keep on pushing that runtime.
Indeed. Yeah. So that's, you know, that's the film. Where do you want to start with breaking it down? I mean, I think we probably should just talk about the character of Superman himself, because Superman is on one level the most iconic, well-known superhero in the American canon, but also maybe the most misunderstood. And, like, one of the projects of this movie, I think, is this interesting kind of, like, commercial rehabilitation to tell to, like, the general public, no, this is what Superman is. Superman isn't a brooding god. He's not a sad boy in the middle of a world where he has to snap people's necks. But he's also not like the Superman Returns version where he's, you know, above everyone, looking down, never having a human emotion. He's a dude from Kansas who has superpowers and tries really, really hard to be good. And that doesn't always mean he can do perfectly, but he tries his best, and that's what matters. And, like, just seeing that version of Superman on screen, I don't know about you, Sean, but that was pretty emotional for me. Like, that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, it's just like it's a thing where it's just been so frustrating for so long, where we have lived in this world of like a billion evil Supermans, right? Like everything has its evil Superman, whether it's Omni-Man in Invincible, or it's Homelander in The Boys, or whatever. Or, I mean, you know, obviously you have your quote-unquote Ultraman, though I don't recognize that he's allowed to use that name, but the clone Superman, whatever, in this.
Is that from the comics, or is that something you made up for this movie?
Okay. Yes, that is from the comics.
Okay.
Yes.
So that is not James Gunn doing copyright infringement on Japan. No. That is okay.
But we have all these like the evil Supermans, and then as you said, that you've got your kind of like, it feels like we've had this version of Superman, or this idea of Superman as this kind of like, oh, he's so kind of like unknowable, and he's invincible, and he's boring because he's too strong, and he just like flies around and beats everything up, and you just can't do anything. with the character. And it's just been so frustrating as a Superman fan to like have that be the impression of the character for so many people, partially because they're only given like either really bad Superman content, like something like Superman Returns or Man of Steel, or they're given these sort of like riffs on Superman, like a Homelander or an Omni-Man, that aren't actually representative of the real character. It's taking like the seed of the idea of some of the iconography of Superman, but it's not actually like a parody of the essence of Superman's like personality or anything like that. It's just the dude who can fly is invincibly strong, and we're taking that and doing that in like, what if someone like that visited our planet, but instead of them being a good guy, they were fine with just murdering everybody and had a total ego. And it just gets very tedious that is like the only version of this you see over and over and over again. So yes, just having the like authentic version of Superman, which is he is, you know, a dork and a really good guy who happens to be the most powerful person on the planet. And so he's going to use those powers to try to do the best that he can. And that is the essence of Superman, and it shouldn't be a hard thing to do. And I think this movie kind of proves it shouldn't be a hard thing to do. You just have to want to do it. And it just feels like there have been a lot of creators attached to Superman or Superman adjacent projects in the mainstream who have not been interested in doing it, like a Zack Snyder, who was not interested in that aspect of the character in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, we've had like lots of different TV versions of Superman. Like there has been lots of content very authentically representing Superman, but it's always just felt like it's on the margins. And so there is something just hugely refreshing about having a mainstream big blockbuster movie coming out that is doing the authentic representation of Superman and showing that, hey, one, it can make for a really great character and a really great story, and two, it doesn't have to be hard. Like, it's fine. Like, he's a character.
Yes.
You can use him like any other character. We've been telling Superman stories for it's in not too long in the future. It will be 100 years. You know, like we're close to the 90th year anniversary of Superman. We've been telling lots of Superman stories that have been very good. It doesn't have to be an impossible thing to do in a movie. And there's like an effortlessness with which this movie shows off that character that is so refreshing.
Absolutely. And like this movie is almost pathologically committed to like making that the arc, right? You know, like Gunn even makes a pretty significant retcon to the like Krypton part of his origin with the message, so that you can have this arc where the beginning of the movie is Superman kind of idolizing this unknown past and this like godlike mission, and the end of the movie is him valuing his experiences on Earth as his most authentic self. And like that is what the movie is about, and that is the whole film. You know, I thought a lot watching this movie, and I bet you did too, Sean, because I know this is a bugaboo for you too, about the scene in Kill Bill where Quentin Tarantino wrote this speech for David Carradine. And David, this is near the end of Kill Bill 2, and Carradine has this speech to Uma Thurman about how Superman, basically he's saying every superhero has an alter ego, but Superman is different because Superman is his real person and Clark Kent is his alter ego, and Clark Kent is his sort of parody and commentary on the weakness of humanity. And one, that's the critique you make of Batman, dude, not Superman. The whole alter ego thing. But two, it's just wrong. And it's wrong in like a really toxic way. But it is also like one of the prevailing ways I think that like mainstream sees Superman. If you look at some of the projects you're talking about, Sean, right? Like that is the root of a lot of the evil Superman stories. And there are several parts of this movie that feel like Gunn, either intentionally or not, just doing a rejoinder to that speech from Kill Bill, particularly at the end where Superman gets the big moment against Lex Luthor where he explains that being human is his actual strength, but really that this whole movie is about how there is a much smaller gap between Clark Kent and Superman than I think the public thinks, and that he is always Clark Kent when he's flying around, and that is what makes him strong, is that he came from Kansas, and he's an immigrant, and he really loves his found family on Earth, and he wants to do his best for the people who took him in. And that being both, you know, literally his sort of found family, but also humanity at large. And I also think, like, obviously this movie is also very politically resonant in a lot of ways. And I think doing that and showing how cool a character Superman is, but then also tying it to the obvious political resonances of the day, because Superman was never an apolitical character, dudes. He was made in 1938. And if you want to check what was going on in 1938, you can. is pretty similar to now in some ways. And I just think having all of that here was like so awesome to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I like you bringing up the Kill Bill thing because I think the thing is there's like there's two versions of Clark Kent, right? There is the like disguised Clark Kent that the character puts on at the Daily Planet, where he's like trying to be more sort of like, you know, bumbling a little bit to kind of play it up. But there is the like the real person, the Clark Kent underneath it, who is, you know, that you can see so clearly in this movie. That's the guy who goes to Lois Lane's apartment and is making the, you know, dinner or whatever, breakfast for dinner. That's the guy who's at the Fortress of Solitude at the beginning of the movie, who the robots are helping. He's in the Superman suit, but it is, you know, he's Clark Kent. He's this kid who grew up in Kansas and all this stuff. You see it in the scene where he goes back and visits the Kents at the farm in Smallville. And yeah, like I think this movie gets all those distinctions so well, that there is the kind of like the Superman figure that he will play up sometimes. Then there is the kind of bumbling Clark Kent he plays up for his coworkers to a certain extent, where, you know, he like has his like pushes up his glasses and he's all like, oh, I'm a dork, I'm not, you know, he does that thing. But then you have this sort of like the very natural, relaxed, like he's still a dork, but he's the dork who's going to do everything he can to help everybody in any way he possibly can. And this movie just kind of sees that that's the core of the character. That's who Clark Kent actually is. And that is also who Superman actually is. And there's, again, like I just keep coming back in my mind this word effortlessness, with which I feel like the movie displays that, both in terms of like James Gunn and the script and all that, but also particularly in terms of the performance with David Corenswet, who just does such a good job of embodying this character and the core of that character, who does put on like very slight masks in certain scenarios, but it is not like Batman, where for Batman / Bruce Wayne, that Batman persona is so like deeply embedded, and then the Bruce Wayne thing is a complete performance he does for other people. For Superman, I think there's like that very slight shift in these kind of little pivots he does to kind of take on slightly different personas. But it should be much more subtle, and I think that's the thing that this movie gets really well.
Absolutely. And man, what a discovery David Corenswet is. I've seen him in a couple of things before, but usually in smaller parts. I actually did not remember until I was looking this up that he is the first guy Mia Goth kills in the movie Pearl, which is one of my favorite movies of the last couple of years, and he's very good in that, but it's a super different movie, so I did not remember he was in that. But like, what a discovery. And I think one of the best things you can say for David Corenswet is that it's the first Superman live-action performance I've ever seen where at no point I was thinking about Christopher Reeve. And that is not to put down Christopher Reeve or anything. I still think Christopher Reeve is always going to be the best live-action Superman, but he was playing a very particular version of Superman, and it was a weightier version of Superman. Like, it had the humanity and the humor, but also, like, Richard Donner's take was a more religious-oriented take and all of that. It was sort of 70s prestige, and, like, he's perfect for that. And everyone since has done some version of Christopher Reeve, I think you could say. Even Henry Cavill in Man of Steel. Like, it's a very different movie, obviously. Christopher Reeve never snapped anybody's neck. But, like, there is still that kind of weightiness that makes you think of it. And I think David Corenswet is just playing a different version of the character, and it is a different take, and it's a modern take. It feels like a Superman who was born in the 90s, you know? And he feels like he could be a contemporary of, I mean, he is our age in this movie. He's 33. And like, that's awesome. And he's got the absolute movie star charisma, but also I think the nuanced acting to pull off all of the complexities of the character, but never let those complexities become, you know, horrible Christopher Nolan style angst. It's a perfect superhero performance.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. There is this slight like horror at realizing you're older than the guy who's playing Superman that I have to go through because he's born in 1993. I'm like, oh god, like no, yes. No. Now I'm slowly just becoming older than all of my favorite characters, and it's just a very weird effect of aging. But yeah, I like one that it does feel like it's a slightly younger take on the character than you typically get in live action. Which is nice, and I think like he's very good at showing the vulnerability of the character, which is a thing that's really critical for Superman, because you need to dispel that sort of myth that perpetuates in popular culture that he's too powerful, he's invincible, blah, 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 all that stuff. And it's like, it's simply not the case. Like, he's not invincible, both in terms of he can lose fights, and I like that this movie shows him struggling to battle threats, because it's Superman is incredibly powerful, but he's not unbeatable. He's never been unbeatable. That's just not part of the character. Like, he has always encountered threats equivalent to his power. There are lots of different monsters and enemies for Superman to be able to fight that they could pull from the comic books. But more importantly, it's like, beyond him struggling in the fights in showing that, it is the vulnerability of who he is as a person, that he really struggles with, like, what is the right thing to do and how do I accomplish that? Because when you're the man who has all the power in the world, like, how do you use that power is the thing you must confront and you must struggle with and must, like, sort of interrogate for yourself of what am I to the world? How do I operate in the world? And how do I use this power to help humanity, not to hurt it? And I think he shows that personal struggle really well in the movie. And that's, I think, like, the most essential thing that the performance needs to nail.
Oh, 100%. So I've been watching a lot of interviews about this movie because James Gunn and David Corenswet in particular are, like, really smart and thoughtful people. And, like, it's cool to hear them talk about how they came to the characters. And one of the things I learned is that the audition scene for the movie, that, like, they did first a round of self-tapes, and then I think they did a dual audition with both Clark and Lois, is the interview scene early in the movie where they're in their apartment. He's made breakfast for dinner for Lois, and then he agrees to do this interview, which kind of goes against him because he underestimates that Lois will do a real interview with him.
Yes, Lois Lane is not going to throw a softball for fucking anybody.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, and that scene, like, absolutely that should be the audition scene, because that is, to me, kind of the key characterization moment of the whole movie for both of them, is that exactly what you're saying with Lois, that, like, she absolutely cares about this guy, but she is a journalist to her core. She's not throwing a softball, even to her boyfriend. And Clark is, like, he truly does struggle to, like, put all this together, because it is tough. Like, this movie is built on a very modern, politically resonant dilemma, which is that there is this war going on in these two fictional countries. Superman, intervened to stop it once, and now it is this sort of political hot potato going on, and that is, like, the perfect Superman conflict, right? It's something that he absolutely has the power physically to stop, but it is so much more complicated than any one man, no matter how superpowered, can ever deal with. Something the movie acknowledges all the way to the end, in that he doesn't actually stop it at the end. The people he inspires, the Justice Gang, do it. And so, like, that scene, I think, and that it culminates in him just screaming, people were going to die, and you realizing how that is just this core thing that guides him in every moment of everything he does, even to his own detriment. Is like, it is such a smart scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that that's, like, the essential scene for the character, because yes, that it's like, there's the people are going to die, and then what I love is that there's the unspoken, and I can do something about it, right? Because that's the Superman problem, is that, like, there's always something he could do to stop it or to fix that problem. He could always go and save those lives, and I think that's, like, one of those things that Lois Lane can't quite understand, right? That's one of, like, the things that separates them at that point in the movie, and then she goes on her own journey to kind of, where she goes to rescue Superman and sees the effect that she can have by being proactive in that way. But yeah, there is that sort of, that powerful struggle that Superman has to go through of, like, I can go and, use my power to smash the tanks and to say stop to the evil dictator man. But, like, I can't just sort of punch, the military-industrial complex in the face, right? Like, I can't just sort of overthrow an entire government and just call it a day. Like, where are the limits that you can use your power? How can he defuse these conflicts and create, like, a better path forward? While also never getting mired down in doing nothing, right? Which is the thing that, like, Lois Lane's constant sort of, like, rebuts to him have no retort to, is like, but what would you do? Like, she has no way to rebut and people are going to die. Like, something needs to be done. Something needs to happen to stop this. And just sitting there and saying it's too hard or it's impossible is not a thing you can do, especially when Superman is standing there. Obviously, the lesson you have to take for us in our real world is that there are also things that we can do in these scenarios. We can all try to be our own Superman, right? That's like kind of the way you have to take forward with it. But the movie does a really good job of showing that dilemma and showing that, like, that Superman, while he struggles, he's never going to stand there and do nothing.
Yes, perfect. Like, another moment that sold me on this movie is in the big kaiju scene when they show him saving a squirrel. And it's just like, what a great way to represent this guy's, like, again, pathological need to do good, that, he will not only save the kids, but there's a squirrel there. He's going to stop that too. Like, anything he can do, anything. And I think the movie is very good at showing that without, ever really having to, like, slow down and anguish over it. But do it very smartly in a way that's always moving the plot forward and the characters forward. And then I do think we just have to tackle this up front. Like, this movie is, like, so weirdly finger on the pulse in a way that, like, it couldn't have been planned to be in certain ways, because, like, there's one of the images that got me in this movie is when he turns himself in to the DOD, and you do this hard cut to Lex's goons, his masked, unidentified goons, shoving his face into the pavement. That, like, took my breath away for a second, because there's obviously such a powerful resonance to the videos we are seeing every day of, these fucking criminal ICE members going around with their fucking masks, just arresting not only random people, but powerful people. Like, it made me think of the video of Alex Padilla, the senator from California, getting shoved to the ground. Because it's like, what that moment is saying in the movie is that, like, they are abusing this power for Superman, which means they're abusing it for everyone under him, too. Which is what you know when you see something like the senator from California is having his face shoved into the ground. But, you have that is an obvious resonance to what's going on right now. That there is an entire second act of this movie taking place in an off-the-books super prison where they are sending political radicals and dissidents and migrants. And of course, Superman breaks those people out, which is awesome. We could use that here. And then you have the whole Boravia, I forget the names of the fictional countries. It's fictional comic book countries. Boravia and Jaranpur is what they call it, which, I think you could read either as a Russia-Ukraine allegory, or I think particularly right now an Israel-Palestine thing, and what's going on in Gaza. And just the amount that this movie, not being, like, preachy or having to stop to, like, make a political statement, but that it is just very aware of the kinds of things going on in the world right now, and not having Superman being an apolitical arbiter off on the side, blindly waving the American flag. No, if Superman is a character who stands for something, that means there's also things he has to stand against. And this movie draws those lines. And it's been cool to see all the reaction online of people who I don't think have seen, like, their politics represented in a comic book movie maybe ever, and going to this and be like, hey, Superman wants to stop the invasion of the little country. That's cool. It's really cool to see.
Yes, yeah. And as I say, like some of it is obviously very intentional. Like, there's lots of, there's, like, if you talk about, like, Lex Luthor and the way he's characterized, some things are, like, they're very clearly aiming at, we want to hit a certain modern political, socio-political thing that's going on. Then some of it is, like, just the world has turned into a, we have actually, there was, I forget which publication it was, but one publication had that headline that's like, it's not necessarily that Superman is a political movie, it's that we live in a world with real supervillains. I think Superman is a political movie, but it is also true that, like, a lot of that resonance is because, like, we have so much of our, specifically in America, our society has gotten off the fucking rails and gone into crazy dictator land, that when you see evil shit on screen, you're like, all that evil shit is, like, what's going on in our world, or it's, like, better than what's going on in our world. Right. Like, the U.S. government seems way more functional in the world of Superman than it is in our actual world. But yes, but it is really nice to have this movie be on the right side of all of those lines, right? Where it is and isn't intentional isn't really the point. It is that, like, Superman is there to do good, and doing good means you're going to side with the people who are being invaded, the people whose country and homeland is being taken away from them. So it doesn't matter if you're reading it as Russia-Ukraine or Israel-Palestine or any number of like hundreds of historical conflicts throughout history. It's like the side of the people who are being massacred and whose homes are being taken from them, those are the people Superman is always going to fight for. And it doesn't matter which side the American government is on, which is the thing in here that makes it the most clearly like the easiest read is the Israel-Palestine metaphor, is because America is siding with the dictator in the movie. That like it doesn't matter which side America is on, Superman's going to stand up for the people who are having injustice that's suffered. And so that is something that's just very satisfying. And as you say, there's the the kind of illegal arrests and the illegal prison stuff. That feels that there's no way that was intentional, because that stuff is way too recent. The Israel-Palestine stuff is obviously more than old enough that could be very intentional. But that is one where I feel like, the world has just gone to shit to such an extent that we have real Lex Luthors beyond what James Gunn could have possibly planned for.
Yes, exactly. But even then, those resonances keep piling up. Like the fact that Lex's plan in Jaranpur is to get rid of everyone and develop the country for himself. And we had, Trump and his goons talking about all the, beachfront property they want to develop in Gaza once they get rid of the Palestinians. And it's just like, you're right. Like James Gunn, I think, wrote the most evil version of Lex Luthor I've ever seen, at least in a movie. I'm sure, like, in comics, there's ones that are comparable. But, like, in a movie, this is by far the most evil Lex Luthor, and it still isn't quite as evil as things that, like, Stephen Miller is out there saying. It's like, that's how off the fucking rails we are.
Yes, and it's a thing that just makes watching Superman very cathartic. It's very similar to I fairly recently watched the most recent Daredevil, the Daredevil Born Again, and that has all the same kind of shit with like the secret police and all that. We're like, man, they could not possibly have known how resonant this is. But it's like, but obviously there are like so many historical examples of societies going through these kinds of cycles that they're using as reference. And it just so happens that it is lining up very perfectly to the hell that we're actually living in.
Sadly, yes. But no, I think it's important. And, one of the things I wrote in my review is that I think one of the balances this movie strikes is that we're talking about kind of weighty stuff at the moment. This is also a silly movie with big, bold colors and crazy things that happen and lots of jokes. And it is fun and it is escapist. But I think it hits a balance that I think is part of the special heritage of American comic books going back to the, pre-World War II era, which is that you can have something that is escapist that also brings you back to Earth feeling like you are a little more empowered and you understand your world a little better, that art can be both of those things, right? And that, the special thing about, comic books is not their incredible political nuance. It is that they're able to draw in these big, pulpy colors a version of the world that is understandable and recognizable, and again, lets you have fun while also going back to your reality feeling, maybe some hope from what you saw. And I think this movie nails that balance better than most comic book movies I've ever seen, where I think it's able to understand what is special about the pulpiness and the lack of nuance and the ability to have fun while also being resonant and real and hopeful. And that is just such a special mixture.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, because as you said, we're talking about kind of those thematic ideas, but the moment to moment of the movie, I mean, that's where you get that kind of more Marvel Studios feel of it. It has that balance of action, but the comic edge to it. And the spectacle, but never losing sight of like kind of the essence of the character and where that's both fun and dramatic. Like it's always sort of striking that balance and keeping it pulpy and fun, but is very conscious to set it in a setting, in a worldview that isn't gross, that is saying that like we're here to stand up for the little guy, we're here to help people, we're not here to hurt them, and that is like the thing that is always kind of fundamentally informing the movie's worldview, and that is very refreshing. Because not all superhero movies do that, to say the least.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't really know of any other superhero movies that do it quite like this, because, like, I give this lecture at CU Boulder every year on the movie Black Panther, and one of the prickly parts of talking about that movie is that as smart and good as that movie is in a lot of ways, it does do a version, and I think it's a better version, but it is still a version of all of the progressive policy goes in the mouth of the villain who kicks too many puppies, and so we have to kill him and not embrace those progressive points that he has, right? And so it is fundamentally conservative in its outlook. And again, I think Black Panther does that better, but it is a real problem with this genre, particularly the Marvel version of it, because that is like the Marvel specialty, is always the villain gets to be somewhat liberal, but then he has to be put down at the end. And, like, this is, I think, just a really, like, good kind of punch in the mouth to that version of it, where, like, no, the most progressive stuff is said by the hero, and the villain is the one saying all the bad shit, and that's a breath of fresh air for Hollywood in general, but, like, this genre in particular.
Yeah, like, I think if you go back to stuff like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, which aren't, like, they're not, like, dealing with these exact kinds of themes, but you have that, like, Spider-Man's always struggling to help people and do what's best. So I think when you get some of those movies that are more on the ground floor, like, I think the earlier Captain America movies generally did a good job about that, particularly the first one. But yes, like, it is like, superhero stuff just has, partially because it is, like, you know, you're connected to the notions of, like, vigilante justice and all that kind of stuff. It has a, like, sort of inevitable gravity pulling it towards very conservative worldviews about, like, what is it to do justice in the world, and meeting that out with violence. And, you know, that is the thing that so much Batman content ends up getting particularly mired in. And particularly the Christopher Nolan movies, which we did a whole series of podcasts if you want to know more detail on that. And it's, like, really, really nice that the Superman movie that could also go off in that territory. And you see places where this movie's, like, getting there, and I have a couple of places when you get to some criticisms of the movie where I think there are some things the movie does not maybe fully think through, but generally speaking, like, the kind of main thrust or the heart of the movie is always in the right place, and you never have to kind of question that, and that is definitely nice.
Yes, indeed. There's no point where, like, you have a character saying, we need to save the Jarhanpurians, but then he kicks a puppy and we have to, like, you know, put him down. Like, that's the thing that I just can't stand in these movies. So, indeed, we've got all that. So, okay, we talked about Superman himself and David Corenswet. Before we move on from that, just talking about the aesthetics of this movie, the costume is so fucking good. Yeah. This is something I didn't have room to talk about in my review, and I just need to gush about it with you, because I know you're a freak about this too. Like, the shade of blue, the shade of red, the texture on it, the fact that they just went for the big red trunks, and the fact that, like, he's in the suit for almost all the movie. It's very similar, actually, to the Matt Reeves movie in that regard, where Pattinson is just Batman for that whole movie, basically, other than a couple of scenes. And it's the same thing here. And this is a similarly just kind of note-perfect version of the costume. And in one of the interviews I watched with Corenswet, they were talking about how when he did his first screen test, they used the costume from Man of Steel, which makes sense. That's the most recent costume that Warner Brothers had, so that's what you screen test with. But they showed a picture of it next to the picture he wound up of the costume he wound up wearing. That Man of Steel costume is so bad. I'm sorry. It is so dark. It is so monochromatic. I hate the texture on it. I hate that it looks like body armor. It's just awful. And, like, what a fucking breath of fresh air. This is, like, the Superman costume of my fucking dreams in this movie. I love it.
Yeah, Man of Steel definitely had that, like, it was that and Amazing Spider-Man 1.
Yes.
That costume. It's just like, they look like they're gross to touch. They look like they're, as you say, they're kind of like monochromatic, and like very like dark and grim looking. They're just gross suits. And yes, it's really nice to have a proper fucking Superman suit with like very bright, bold colors. And, you know, I think they do a good job. This is, you know, another thing that, like, the Marvel Studios thing does, like, Marvel Studios always does such a good job with their costumes of finding ways to, like, give some texture to the suit, without going too far into the, like, and now they're just wearing body armor. But you also can't, you know, you can't sell a modern Superman movie and him wearing the costume for the Christopher Reeves era that is just like, you know, a straight suit there's nothing else to it.
Yes.
There is a texture to the suit, but it helps kind of catch detail on it, which is really nice. But the most important thing by far is that they have the trunks. because, there have been lots of experiments with trunkless Supermans. Sometimes in the comics, it can be done okay, depending on the artist, but that's also because you have such control, if you're the artist, over how that suit appears because you're fucking drawing it. Versus like in a movie where you're not being able to select each individual frame to make sure that the suit doesn't look ugly and terrible. And you just need those trunks to break up the blue and break up the lines of the body. It's just particularly in live action, non-trunk Superman just looks formless and shapeless. It looks so bad on camera that it's just, people make fun of it for whatever, but people make fun of anything. It is such the better choice to say, no, I don't care if like some people will make fun of, he wears his underwear on the outside or whatever, because it's a classic Superman joke. It is a good costume. It is the costume it needs to be. It's Superman has never strayed far from it, and anytime they've always come back to it for a very good fucking reason. So you don't need to break what's not, or you don't need to fix what's not broken. So just stick with the classic suit and make it look as good on screen as you possibly can. And that is what they have done here.
Yes, and this was another moment when, I saw this interview before I saw the movie, and I knew just from this that Corin Sweat would be a good Superman, where he was talking about that he and James Gunn had gone back and forth a lot on, like, what do you do with the trunks? Because it is the hardest part of the suit to, like, figure out, right? Mm-hmm. And, like, how you're going to deploy it. And Corin Sweat said his ultimate take, and Gunn ultimately agreed with it, is that they need to be there, they need to be big, they need to be bold, and the point is not that they look cool. The point is that Superman doesn't care if they look cool. The point is that Superman is kind of a big, earnest dork, and the trunks can be part of that. They don't have to be ignored. And I think, like, that's such a good read on the character. It redounds to the quality of the costume. And yeah, I completely agree. The biggest thing is just the color balance. You need that red in the middle. Yes. Like, the Supergirl TV show had a version of this where her costume in the first 4 or 5 seasons was the more traditional one with the red skirt, which is kind of in place of the red shorts, and then she has kind of leggings underneath that. And I thought that was a really good version of that costume. But I do also understand, like, Melissa Benoist saying, I would rather have pants because they're easier to move in, and I understand the practicality of that. So in the later seasons, they have a costume that is her just in pants. And it looks good. It's the best version of the no red around the middle Superman costume I've ever seen, because I think the shade of blue they had was good and all of that stuff. But it still felt like it was really missing something with no red in the middle. And just, this is correct. I think the red, the blue, the balance of it, the way it shows up in camera, all of that. The fact that I also think it's a pretty easy suit to double with CGI. This is the effects. Some of the effects are iffy in some places, but like for Superman himself, you can never like easily tell when he's become a CGI thing, which sometimes he has to be for the flying. And I think that definitely helps. When it is a more quote-unquote realistic costume, the CGI doubling also becomes more problematic, and when it's more colorful, the better you can do with that.
Yes, and I think that's also like that little extra texture they have on there and stuff like that helps to sell it when you do a good job with like being able to match the lighting and stuff. It helps sit the costume in the environment in those digital effects sequences. Yeah, I agree with you. Like there are parts where the digital effects stuff gets very comic book superhero movie but never for Superman himself. Like they always do a very good job of having him appear on screen and like sell that he's there, whether he's literally physically there or not.
Absolutely. And a lot of it is practical. Like a lot of the flight stuff with him, like in the first scene where he's flying in the Arctic, all of that stuff, that is fully practical. What it is it's him on a green screen with a plate that was done through drone footage behind him, kind of like combining the old school Superman way of doing it with like Top Gun Maverick, mount a camera on something flying. And I think that stuff works fantastic. Like that flying stuff looks so good. So I love when they can mix those things together. You want to talk about some of the other characters here, starting with Lois Lane, second on the call sheet, Rachel Brosnahan, who everyone wanted to play Lois, because we all knew if you'd seen 1 second of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon that she was brought here to Earth to play Lois Lane. And I think that bears out to be true. She's just perfect. I don't know what else to say. It's like, that's Lois. She walked off the comic book page and there she is.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it is like with Superman, it is a very authentic version of Lois. It's a take no shit Lois Lane, which is what Lois Lane should be. And yeah, I really like this version of Lois. I like that they give her a lot of stuff to do, which is a thing that like I think a lot of Superman stuff ends up just like Man of Steel kind of felt like this, that like Lois is there because she needs to be there because she's a super famous character and she's Superman's love interest. So we got to have Lois Lane in there. Here it feels like they understand why Lois is important, how she kind of grounds Clark in his world at the Daily Planet and to humanity and like everything else, while also making her feel like a very powerful individual person. And I really like that they give her a whole adventure that she goes on to go save Superman. Like, I thought that that was a really great idea for the script to, you know, make sure that she's never lost in the mix, that she's never just Superman's girlfriend. Because as soon as the character just becomes Superman's girlfriend, it's not Lois Lane anymore. And so all that stuff where she goes off with Mr. Terrific and goes and saves Superman, and then, you know, they give her a lot of like good material in the climax where she's with the rest of the Daily Planet people and she's flying the ship and they're publishing the story to try to wreck Luthor's reputation. It's like they never lose sight of her, and I just feel like that's happened so frequently with this character, whether it's movies or some of like the animated films and stuff like that. I thought like this was such a good balance of keeping her there, keeping her present, making her important, and showing how her relationship with Clark is like the kind of the centerpiece of the movie in so many ways. And that is as it should be.
And they thread the needle really well, because one of the other ways Lois is often misused is when they do make her active, they make her sort of your human-level spectator for Superman's crazy bullshit. And, like, I think they do a good tweak on that here, where she's actually kind of the human-level spectator for the world around Superman. That she goes and visits the Hall of Justice, and she's the one who primarily is our entry point to Mr. Terrific, and some of that, like, extra, like the bigger DCU side of it. I think that like one of the best scenes in the movie is when they go to that army base and it's one of the two needle drops in the movie that James Gunn allows himself, is the song 5 Years Time, while Mr. Terrific is like taking care of everyone and she's in the bubble and you're seeing Mr. Terrific's crazy shit from her point of view. And I kind of love that the one time they have Lois there to like be in awe of the superhero, it's not for Superman, it's for Mr. Terrific. That's like a very smart use of it. But then with all of this too, they also don't lose sight of the fact that Lois and Clark are in love and they're very passionate together. And like just the basic fact that David Corn Sweat and Rachel Brosnahan have chemistry and they spend a lot of the movie French kissing passionately, like, God damn it, superhero movies are so sexless now. That alone kind of startled me. Like, if you go back to like 2002 and you think of like Spider-Man and Mary Jane, the upside down kiss, this is not all that remarkable. But 25 years later, like, movies don't do this anymore. And so that alone was like, oh, thank God. They can have human parts and have sex, and it can be part of the movie. It's fine.
Yes, yeah. Like, as you say, this used to be like so common that it became rote in many movies could just be very like tiring. Yes. With like the every movie has to have a love interest and you have to have your big kiss. Where, you know, not every movie needs that, but some movies do need it. And I think we have gone so far on the other side of that scale where it just is like, where I'm kind of with you when Clark is in her apartment and she comes in and they start kissing each other. It's like, oh my God, kissing. It made me feel like when I show Romeo plus Juliet to my 14-year-olds and they like the various reactions to them kissing in that movie and like, oh, and they're so scandalized by it.
Yes.
Because it's like, you know, because they're teenagers, but also potentially because like these movies don't show this kind of stuff. And it's like, yes, good. Like, because this is one where I think Lois Lane is so central, kind of like Mary Jane in Spider-Man or Gwen Stacy, depending on where you're adapting it. Like, Superman is a character who love in his relationship with Lois Lane is so important to the character that you have to have it. Like, it needs to be there. It's such an essential part, and I would love that they have it here. Again, I think that's true of like Spider-Man, like should have that. Specifically like Peter Parker Spider-Man. But like Batman is a good example of a character. He doesn't need it. You know, you could do it if you want to, I guess. But like Batman does not need to have a love interest in every fucking movie, which became very apparent when we did our Batman movie podcast. I was like, God, you know, it's like, you know, maybe Christopher Nolan's a little bit too sexless, but it's like, you know, but Batman is not a character who needs to have a love interest all the time. Superman and Lois Lane, like, there's a reason why they have made 2 different TV shows about their relationship. It is like a big thing. And yeah, I really appreciate that relationship is important, that they show that it is a like romantic relationship with real chemistry, and they don't like hide it or cut around it or make it very sort of like chaste and sexless. That's very appreciated.
I mean, do you remember in Man of Steel when they kiss for the first time? And it's in front of all the ash from fucking destroyed Metropolis on top of them. But, like, it comes out of nowhere because, like, these two characters have had maybe a little bit of a, like, interpersonal spark, but not a romantic chemistry. And it looks like Henry Cavill and Amy Adams are being held at gunpoint to kiss. And it's just, like, uncomfortable. And I feel like that is, even when superhero movies do have romance and kissing now, it's that version of it where it's like no one feels comfortable on set doing this, and this just feels like this is very natural. These are human beings. They are in love. They kiss. That's part of it, and like it is important. Superman should be romantic. You know, make fun of the "Can you read my mind" scene in Superman 78 all you want. But, like, it is a centerpiece of that movie that there's a romantic flight scene between the two of them where they are both equally enamored with each other. You know, him in Lois's force of personality and her in his, you know, flight ability and all these other things. Like, the romance matters. It just does. And you have to have it in there. And you can have it while having a very cool version of Lois Lane who is active in the plot. And this movie proves that, and I'm very happy about that.
Absolutely.
Then we got Lex Luthor, and oh man, I was sure Nicholas Hoult was going to hit this out of the park. I was still kind of astonished at how just fucking evil he is, because Nicholas Hoult has done a lot of different things. I don't think he's ever played someone this just bald-faced evil before, and he is so good at it. Like, to the point that in some cases it's kind of like cackle with glee, oh my gosh, he's so fun being evil. And in some it's just like, this guy kind of scares me at how evil he is and how much he gets off on it. I think this is a great take on Lex Luthor.
Yeah, I'm a little bit less positive on it. Like, I like it a lot overall. It's certainly like... it's, you know, if you're comparing it to Batman v Superman Lex Luthor, it's like a billion times better than that. I think the only place where it doesn't fully land for me, and well, this is kind of maybe bigger problems I have with the third act, which is the only part of the movie I have kind of major criticisms for. But I do think, like, there's just a little something missing with the character. I think, like, a little extra spark of charisma or something he needs that is a little bit missing. Like, there's the shit-eating, just find a cackling Saturday morning cartoon villain-ness of it does work really well for me, and I like... the pettiness of the character works really well for me. Of that, like, it is all, everything he's doing, everything he's going for is just purely to prove to Superman that Superman ain't shit, right? Lex Luthor's the biggest dog in town, and that's, at the end of the day, that's all he wants to do. And I think he sells that really well. I think there is just a little something, just a little extra, like, glint in the eye or something that is not quite there. That, for me, like, if you've got, you know, a fairly different version or, like, era of the character, but, like, the Gene Hackman version, or, like, for me, if you're doing, it's not live action, but the Clancy Brown version of the character from the cartoons, like, is more captures. There's, like, this extra thing for Lex Luthor as a character from the cartoons and the comic books and stuff like that I think, like, Nicholas Hoult is not quite there on, but he's very closer than, like, I would have thought. Like, I think Lex Luthor is a very hard character to get, because I think there's a really tight line you need to walk with him, and I think he does a very good job, but not a perfect job.
So yeah, this is interesting, because I don't necessarily disagree that that's true, but I actually kind of like that about this version. Like, there's something... Not to say that, like, these characters have to be fully reflective of reality. Obviously, they don't. The main character flies around in red spandex, you know. But, like, there's something about, I think, recognizing the kind of tech mogul billionaire we have now in the 2020s and how fucking weird and awkward and uncharismatic and awful these people are. And, like... It's particularly the moment that sold me on his Lex is actually kind of late in the movie, and it is where it's where the engineer is filling Superman's lungs with the nanites, and he thinks he's watching Superman die. And it's this long take that's like 10, 15 seconds that Gunn holds on, where the camera is slowly pushing in as he's watching it. And Holt, like, his face is like flickering into something like a grin, but also not quite that. And I think it's a spectacular little piece of acting of this guy getting what he wants, getting off on it, but also not quite knowing how to show any human emotion in the moment, that I thought was like I thought very creepy and a very canny read on people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, or the kinds of people who are our Lex Luthors today, who are just a very different breed than the kinds of people, Gene Hackman would have been thinking about in 1978, or the original conception of the character versus like a Henry Ford or something. Like, I that part of it worked for me really well. And part of this is, I'll just say, I'm in the bag for Nicholas Hoult. He's one of my favorite modern actors. I think he's always great. But I still like that moment. I wrote a whole paragraph about that in my review, just that shot, because I think it's a really great little piece of acting.
Yeah, I think it's a really great piece of acting. I think for me, where it doesn't fully work is that, like, I think it's like the hard thing about trying to do this, like, it's the modern day version of Lex Luthor with Elon Musk and all of that, is that, like, he can't be as competent as he is. He can't be as good as he is if he's going to be that. And that's part of that thing where, like, for me, where it kind of falls apart is the scene where Superman and Lex Luthor have their, like, face-to-face at the end of the movie, and Superman gives his speech or whatever about, like, you're wrong about me and all that. It's like, I think that speech is a little bit clunky, but it's fine. But there's something of, like, I think it's where I felt like that missing spark of Lex Luthor is there should be, if you're doing this speech and you're doing some of that kind of stuff they're doing with the character, there should be this sense that Lex Luthor could be, like, the best. Like, he could be a guy who could do so much for humanity. I don't think Elon Musk can do much for humanity. Like, he's like, because Elon Musk isn't smart. He's not capable. He's rich, right? Lex Luthor is a genius. He's brilliant. There's so much he could do. And I think there's just something that doesn't quite mesh with the, like, tech bro, but we also want our, like, super genius. Like, like, you should be able to imagine, if you're doing your DC multiverse stuff, the multiverse where Lex Luthor is the guy who a couple things went different, and he's that world's Superman, which is, obviously a classic multiverse thing. And that's that little extra, that's that spark, that's that charisma, that's that, like, extra thing. And I think, like, it's where the movie kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too with the character, that it's not willing to really let go of some of that traditional Lex Luthor stuff, because I think if you let it go so much, there'd be no point in naming him Lex Luthor anymore, a la Batman v Superman, where I don't even know why that character's called Lex Luthor. He so does not resemble the character in any way, shape, or form. But then also wanting to have this, like, kind of, take on the modern tech bro thing. And I think it's just, that's where I'm saying, like, there's this, like, tightrope you're trying to walk with the character, and I don't think it gets really nailed.
Yeah, the more we talk about it, the more it just strikes me what a fucking hard character this is to do today.
Yes.
And if anything, I do kind of appreciate how well it does work. I don't think I have these issues with it, but I do understand where you're coming from, and I think this is a valuable conversation.
Yeah, because I guess part of the thing is, like, when Superman says that line to him about, like, and I hope you can too, it just, like, rings so false, because that's not who this character is, right? It's like, I don't think this movie sees hope for him in any way. That, like, I think is there's just something that it just doesn't quite land, and that's like the fundamental thing about it that doesn't fully work for me.
I guess that moment lands for me because I think Superman believes that of everyone. I think Superman believes that people can be their best, and like, I like the way Corin Sweat plays that, where he is really summoning everything inside him to meet this moment with some degree of grace, when what he clearly wants to do is punch this guy into the sun. I like that. One other thing, speaking of Luthor, that just to tell you how perfect, this is, like, I think a test for any Superman actor, is can they come into a room authoritatively and go, Luthor? And David Corin Sweat does that really well. Like, do you agree? Yeah. Like, that is, like, a really key Superman thing, is to be able to walk into a room, hands on your hips, go Luthor, and, like, everyone in the room kind of sits up a little bit. There's something about David Corin Sweat nails that, I think.
Yeah, I did, like, the first thing I did after I came home from watching the movie is watch the clip on YouTube from the original Superman movie where Superman breaks into Lex Luthor's hideout, and Gene Hackman Luthor explains his whole plan about fucking blowing up the California countryside with the San Andreas Fault and all this shit. I'm like, God damn, that's a good movie. And and that starts with him Superman knocking down the wall and walking in, hands on hips, going, Luthor, what is your diseased mind thought of this time? Or whatever the line is. And
yes.
Like, yes, you if you're playing Superman, you need to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, tons of other characters we can talk about. Let's talk about the Justice Gang, who fucking rock. Particularly, to me, the scene stealer of this entire movie is Mr. Terrific, played by Eddie Gathegi. Eddie Gathegi is someone I have loved forever. I had known him all the way back to House. He is one of the doctors auditioning in season 4 to be on the team. He's the Mormon doctor. But I've seen him in a ton of stuff since then. He's in For All Mankind, the Apple show about the space race. He's really good in that. He was in X-Men First Class. I don't know if he or anyone else remembers that, but he is the first member of the First Class to get killed because that movie is kind of racist, and they killed the one black guy in the movie. But he is Mr. Terrific here, and he is terrific. I did not even know this character existed before I watched this movie, and now I want to go watch everything this character has ever appeared in. I am a Mr. Terrific fanboy now.
Yes, this is a character that, like, I was vaguely aware of, like, what Mr. Terrific was, but I've never, like, I don't know if I've actually seen any, like, he must be in one of the animated movies.
He's in Justice League Unlimited. I'm looking at it right now, so you would have seen him there. I don't know how much he's in it, but
yeah, everybody's in Justice League Unlimited. That show earned its subtitle, but there's like a couple of the sort of side characters get their own special episode. I don't think Mr. Terrific gets his own episode. Maybe I'm misremembering. But yes, there's like that. I don't think I've read any comics with Mr. Terrific, but he's not a character I know a whole lot about. But yeah, this movie sold me on the character so hard. It's just such a... it's where I feel like you can feel James Gunn stretching out a little bit, you know? Like, yes. I feel like there's... he's doing an amazing job with the Superman stuff, but you also feel that, like, Superman's not fully in James Gunn's wheelhouse. He's having to kind of, like... really work really hard to nail the Superman stuff. Then Mr. Terrific comes on screen. It's like, this dude could just, like, walk onto the set of a Guardians of the Galaxy movie and just blend right the fuck in. There's just a naturalness that with which the character kind of appears. And then, I love that you have, all the Justice Gang there in that first scene with, like, the kaiju, and you get all that stuff. But, like, immediately as soon as Mr. Terrific's on the screen, you're like, this guy's going to be a big deal. I love all the Justice Gang, but you're like, this dude is something else. And so then when he's the one guy who steps out to go help Lois Lane, you're like, fuck yeah. Like, I want to see what this guy can do. And yeah, he's the best. Just, like, all the shit of him dealing with the pocket universe and all, like, the techno bullshit he deals with, like, it's got to be some of the best, like, pseudo techno babble I've ever heard from a character / actor. Like, it's just so fucking good. Yeah, it's an amazing performance. He absolutely carries the movie anytime he's on screen. You can't take your eyes off him.
It's some kind of magic Eddie Gathegi is summoning to have the amount of screen presence and charisma he has while wearing the most ridiculous costume anyone's ever worn in one of these movies. It's not just, he's got the T on the face with the black lipstick and eyeliner and everything, so it's all black. But then you also have his fucking biker jacket that says terrific on one arm and fair play on the other arm, and it's got terrific in cursive on the back, and just on all of that stuff. Like, and he... At no point do you question the reality of this character. That's just, you don't question it for a second. It's not silly. It's Mr. Terrific. Like, I love this dude so much that by the time you get to his big moment at the end where he's like, I don't need your help. I'm goddamn Mr. Terrific. I applauded in the theater, and I don't remember the last time I broke into spontaneous applause in a superhero movie. And everyone I've talked to about this movie was like, oh yeah, Mr. Terrific is the best. Like, just such a clear breakout character. And, like, it is very much James Gunn stretching his James Gunn legs, but I also think it's very necessary for a new Superman movie to feel like it expands the boundaries a little bit. And like, also because this is starting a new DCU, to, like, make it feel like there is a universe to explore is important. But, like, it's cool that there's a Superman movie where we can walk out of it and all feel like we're discovering new parts. We're not just talking about, like, how did this General Zod compare to the last 3 General Zods or anything like that, right? Like, I think it really does. That's what Crypto is, the Justice Gang, all of that stuff. I don't think it's the movie being overstuffed. I think it's genuinely important that this movie has kind of a bit of a sprawl to it, and he is definitely the centerpiece of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Superman always just feels better, like, in a bigger world. I think like Batman is a good example of a character that, like, he works very well if you just kind of zero in on just Batman only stuff. But I think there's something that, like, the scale of the character of Superman and what he can do is just so huge. You just kind of can't buy him in a world where he's the only superhero, or
Yeah.
like he's not technically the only superhero, but you just somehow don't see other superheroes. I mean, this, he's the fucking leader of the Justice League. Like it's Superman. Like he needs to be in this world populated with other superhero and superpowered people. And I just think it is something that like is so to the movie's benefit that it is doing that. Because I think it's like the movie, regardless of the whole, like, that James Gunn is tasked with creating his own DC cinematic universe and all that shit, whatever. Like, I think he probably would do most of this stuff regardless of that fact. Because
Yes.
I suspect that, in fact, I know, because one of the interviews I saw on YouTube, he was talking about how, like, a lot of what he wanted to bring to the movie was the sensation he had reading Superman comics when he was a kid, and that a big part of that is in the comics, like Superman was one of those characters that just crosses over with fucking everybody. Constantly there are people popping in and out of Superman comics. He's got a huge supporting cast of characters, and then a big cast of like other heroes and stuff that are kind of constantly bumping into his world, because the scale of Superman's world is so huge, and he's the flagship of the DC universe in the comic books. And so I think like this movie captures that feeling so well that like there should be other people in Superman's orbit. Yeah, and so all the Justice League are cool, but Mr. Terrific within that capacity is just the best. Like he's partially because he's such an obscure character that you don't have any preconceived notions. It's not Wonder Woman coming in here or whatever. It's someone that, is in maybe a couple episodes of Justice League Unlimited. Like that's like where you might know the character from if you're not reading the comic books. A character of that level of obscurity, bringing him out and like executing it with such a high level of quality is awesome, and is something that is such a breath of fresh air in a DC movie.
Well, and like talking about that side of it, and you saying James Gunn replicating that feeling of reading a comic, I've never seen a comic book movie that feels quite like you've gone into a comic store and just grabbed a issue off the shelf and started reading. Because I love how this movie replicates that feeling of it just starts, it's got that little text introduction with the threes, because Superman can never fully separate from Christian allegory, and the Trinity and everything. And then we're just off to the races. And that, I like this, that the start of the movie is that scene of him doing the Yamcha pose in the snow and having Crypto come and save him. I love that is just the beginning, and that we start after a big battle and then we move on. Like there's something about that that's kind of if you think of like original Star Wars starting with, I think we take it for granted now, but that also begins in the midst of the action, right?
Yeah.
Of Leia is running on this ship and Darth Vader invades it and all that stuff. Like, because it is this serial thing pulling from, in that case, Flash Gordon and like sci-fi B movies. And I love that this replicates that for comic books, which are serial in the same way. And just like, no, just hit the ground running and go. I think this movie does that spectacularly well, while still feeling like it has a story with a beginning, middle, and end on all that.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely has that feeling of like, all it needs to have that feeling of you picking up a random issue is just a random editor's note yellow box in the corner at some points. Like, if you want to know more about the battle with the hammer of whatever, read Superman issue 141, or
Yes.
like that's all it needs is like a little asterisk of that in the corner, because yes, it absolutely captures that feeling of you're kind of jumping in medias res of a bigger story arc. In this like bigger world that already exists, and you're like, you're dipping your toes into it. And yeah, it's a really cool way to present all of this while also avoiding having to do yet another Superman origin story. In some ways this is a Superman origin story, but it is not a like literal, we start on Krypton and Krypton explodes and we see him as a baby come to Earth. Like, you don't need to do all that shit. They make it feel like it is the first movie for this version of Superman, and therefore it is a kind of origin. You're just seeing him kind of develop and grow, but you are not starting from nothing to get there. And that is a huge relief, because if there's one superhero that you do not need to have that all dramatized for, it is Superman. It is fine. The other one would be Batman, and that's just another thing that the Batman did extremely well, is saying it's okay. We don't need to start with two people getting shot in an alleyway with their little kid there seeing it. Like, it's okay. We can tell a story with the character and still have it work.
Absolutely you can. And then, like, with all the... Well, we'll talk about some of the other characters in a minute, but I also just wanted to say off of what you were saying, Sean, about that I think Gunn would do a lot of what he does in this movie, whether or not he was setting up a larger DC universe. Like, this does not have the Marvel thing where it ever grinds to a stop to set up a different movie, where you go, oh, that's why this is there, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, Hawk Girl... I like her in this. She's not the most fleshed out of the Justice Gang, but it's clear that she's not there because they're planning a Hawk Girl Disney Plus series, right? And like, you didn't see the Black Panther sequel, but that is what they did with Ironheart. Like that movie, Ryan Coogler is doing that at fucking gunpoint, doing the Ironheart stuff in that movie. And that's never, even the Supergirl cameo at the end of this is paying off on the whole Crypto thread in the movie, that Crypto is there and Superman has intimated that it's not his dog and all of that stuff. Also, I'm just happy to see Supergirl in a movie theater in a good movie, because that is cool. So yeah, in terms of the other Justice Gang members, Nathan Fillion is Guy Gardner.
Yes.
The role he was fucking born to play. How great is that? He's not in it a ton, but he doesn't need to be, because it's just so clearly like that character just exists, has a life, comes from outside this movie. You feel like there's a whole other Guy Gardner series going on that we're not seeing. I love it.
Yeah, them sticking with... I mean, just the choice of it being Guy Gardner is so good, because, you know, obviously he's a much more obscure... I mean, he's got to be the most obscure of all the human Green Lanterns. Because he's the dick Green Lantern. He's the one who's like an asshole. You know, like, I don't know a huge amount about Guy Gardner. I'm not a big Green Lantern guy. Like, but that's the one thing I know is like, it's the Green Lantern who's just a piece of shit and everyone fucking hates his guts. And he's got the stupidest hairdo you've ever seen. And man, they fucking nailed that character. Like, Nathan Fillion does such a good job being this like lovable fucking just piece of shit. With like the stupidest fucking haircut you've ever seen. But he wears it with such love and pride. And yeah, it is a really fun character. Obviously not nearly as central to the movie as Mr. Terrific is, but it's just one of those other characters that just like fleshes out the bigger world. And I think it's just such a fun choice, that you're not going with Hal Rayner, who's the classic Green Lantern, or the classic modern Green Lantern, the classic Silver Age Green Lantern. I'm trying to figure out how to define these characters, because there's the actual classic Green Lantern from the fucking 30s and 40s, but that's a different thing. But Hal Rayner, who coincidentally Nathan Fillion has voiced in some of the animated stuff, is such a fucking just wet blanket nothing of a character. He's so boring. That it is very fun for them to pick one of the fun Green Lanterns. The other Green Lantern they could do that I would really love would be the Jon Stewart one from the Justice League cartoon. But if you're not going to do him, Guy Gardner, I mean, he's the one that should be in a James Gunn movie, I guess. It is Guy Gardner. Yes. It's the right choice for this director.
Well, Sean, I've got good news for you, because one of the next DC things coming out is the Lanterns TV show, where Aaron Pierre, awesome actor, is playing Jon Stewart. And he's paired with Hal Jordan, played by Kyle Chandler from Friday Night Lights. That show sounds fucking awesome. Nathan Fillion's going to be in that as well. And he's also showing up in the next season of Peacemaker. But yeah, I love it. There's something about the super casual way Nathan Fillion like flings his hand to do the Green Lantern powers that I adore. It says so much about the character that he is like so consciously flippant about how he does this, that he's like, it's clearly like a learned casualness that just speaks to what a douchebag he is, and I adore it.
Yes, I like that he's not like doing big poses to get a big boxing glove to come out. And I do like that they're creative with the Green Lantern powers, that it's not just a series of large fist-shaped objects that he's punching things with. Like, he's actually trying to do stuff with it, because that's the classic Green Lantern thing, is a character whose ability is to create constructs of anything he can imagine, and the best thing he can always imagine is a big fucking fist. And I like that they're doing a bit more with him here, but he is just throwing these things off with the utmost casualty. It's very good.
Yeah, I like the oven mitts he puts on the kaiju in that scene. That's pretty good. There's a lot of good stuff that he does. So, yeah, enjoyed that. And then you have Hawk Girl, Isabella Merced, who gets, like, the least screen time of these. Although my favorite scene with her is actually outside of the Hawk Girl armor, where they're just at the Hall of Justice hanging around. I do love having these three people inside a big, fully built Hall of Justice, and they have no real members, so they're just kind of hanging out in the middle of the space. I like that set a lot, and I do like her. I hope we get to see more of her at some point, because I did like her performance quite a bit.
Yes, yeah, like I liked her all the stuff out of the costume and just like I was going to say the chemistry with the other characters. I don't even know if chemistry is the right word. I mean, it is chemistry in terms of like it works really well on screen, but
Yeah.
that sense of these three people don't give a shit about each other. They don't like each other. They don't really want to be working with each other. They're just doing it because they're all sponsored by Maxwell Lord or whatever. But like I like how much of not a team those three are. It's just these sort of, Mr. Terrific just doesn't seem to think about the others. Guy Gardner is only thinking about himself, and then Hawk Girl is just like reluctantly there. And it's a really great mood.
She's a Gen Zer taking the paycheck, like
Yes,
so
exactly.
clearly. Like I love how that's played, and yeah, I like obviously the whole Maxwell Lord of it is sort of there for comics nerds who know what that is. I don't think it takes away from the movie if you don't know. We do get our brief sight of Maxwell Lord at the end, and it is James Gunn's brother playing him, he's in everything James Gunn's ever made,
Yes.
but also you would know him from Gilmore Girls because he's one of the main characters.
I would
there.
not
But
know him from Gilmore Girls because I've not seen
Okay.
Gilmore Girls. I'm just
People would know, and this is Sean
Thank
Gunn.
you.
I meant, by the way. But anyway, Sean Gunn, and I think Maxwell Lord is a good character, so I'm excited to see more of that because there's a lot of he's an interesting counterpoint to a Lex Luthor, and like the fact that they've set up a Lex Luthor here, I think gives them room to run with that kind of side of things in the future. But I enjoy all of that. And then you do have Metamorpho, who joins the Justice Gang at the end because he's the one person who likes the name. So, Guy Gardner wants him there. I liked that resolution of that subplot. But man, this is another character that everyone I've talked about this movie is like, that guy was awesome. And he is. It's Anthony Kerrigan, who you would know from Barry. He's the sort of bald albino gangster in that show, kind of the breakout character of Barry. And obviously you can't recognize Anthony Kerrigan because he's in the makeup, but awesome character. I love the arc that he goes on. Obviously he is sort of standing in for our migrant characters in the movie, but then also he gets to be one of the heroes at the end who goes and saves Baravia and or stops Baravia and saves Jarhanpur, and that character rocks.
Yes, I'm just happy to see Metamorpho in a movie. Like that's like when you have that like wide shot of the cell or whatever, and you can kind of see a dude sitting there, but he's got like a purple arm and an orange arm. I'm like, is that fucking Metamorpho? And at first I thought like, oh, it's just going to be a background cameo if it's one of the people in the cells, but then they take Superman to the cell with Metamorpho. And of course it's a smart use of the character that like he can, and I'm sure this has been done in the comic books, but that he can create kryptonite because he can create any element he can sort of think of. And yeah, like I love that. I love his little arc in the movie, and that kind of payoff of, it feels like it's the thing that pays off Superman's kindness, is that is the thing that gets him out of this scenario, is this other guy who's like willing to trust him with his infant son's life and all this stuff. It's a good way to have like the scenario that Superman can't get out of, but his goodness is the thing that like creates a scenario that can get him out. I think that's a well done part of the script. And then it's just really cool to have Metamorpho be the character there because he's just cool, and it's like it's the kind of comic book character that you don't normally expect to be on screen, partially because he's about as goofy looking a character as you can imagine. I mean, it's a very silly character, but they do him really well. They play it totally straight. They have some fun with his powers, including the incredibly gross moment where he turns his entire body into fucking acid and his head's
Yes.
just floating there, which is again another place where you can feel that like that kind of slightly more tight-knit James Gunn doing the Superman stuff just gonna be like, and you just feel him relax his shoulders a little bit. Like, yes, I get to splash all these people in acid and have a weird floating head on screen. That's not a thing that normally Superman gets to do if he's in the scene also.
Yes, but this is where like James Gunn kind of counterintuitively is the perfect person to do this, because he can really understand and do an earnest take on Superman, but then flesh out the world in weird enough ways around him that it all feels right, And I think having Metamorpho there feels right. I like the way they visualize the character, where it is Anthony Kerrigan in makeup and prosthetics, and then obviously becomes CGI in moments where he needs to, but they don't have him be CGI the whole way through. Very similar to how they did a lot of the characters in Guardians with prosthetics and makeup. Just, even if it's only some of the performance, having a human in makeup you can look at just sells every other moment, like when he is a spinning head that is CGI, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So love all of that. Love those characters. Obviously, this movie has a huge cast. Was there anyone else you wanted to mention who shows up here?
We've got Jimmy Olsen is in the movie. That's like a fun,
Skylar
like
Gisondo.
Yeah, and I think I just like that you do have, while you don't spend a huge amount of time with it, you do have the whole like crew at the Daily Planet,
Yeah.
and that kind of the Superman supporting cast are all represented well. Like it's nice. It's one of the many things in the movie that just makes it feel like you've opened up a Superman comic book. Is you're not digging super deep into Perry White's background or any of that kind of stuff, because that's not what this specific story is about. But you just have a really great sense of the larger world in which Superman exists and Clark Kent exists, and having a good Jimmy Olsen, a good Perry White, like all of that contributes to those.
Yes. And Perry White, I mean, we've got a great Perry White here
Yeah.
with Wendell Pierce, who obviously is one of the great character actors. And just the fact that they have him chomping on a cigar for every second of his screen time, I think really sells it. I love near the end when, the city is being torn apart and he's just sitting there casually smoking his cigar while Lois is very confidently pitching the story to him. And then he's like, "This is great, kid. You got that crazy copter on the roof? All right, everybody, let's go." And he's just not fazed by any of it. It's a perfect Perry White. Even if he's only in the movie for a few minutes, like, that's exactly the kind of effect you're talking about, where I don't need Perry White to be the center of the movie, but when you cut to Perry White and he feels like totally right, that's awesome.
Yes. Another actor that I didn't notice in the movie, but it made me crack up during the credits, was when Alan Tudyk's name popped up, and I was like,
Yeah.
Alan Tudyk was in this movie? And then I stopped for half a second, like, he was the funny robot. Yep.
Yes, of course.
Because I just finished watching Andor Season 2 and rewatching Rogue One, in which he plays the funny droid, K2, which was in Rogue One, and they brought that character into the second season of Andor near the end. I'm like, Alan Tudyk was in this movie. Like, oh yeah, he was. I guess that robot was not quite as big, so maybe he didn't have to be on stilts this time. But it's like, I like that Alan Tudyk is now like typecast as the funny robot in Hollywood movies if he's not doing voice acting for a Disney movie, I guess. It's a very good robot, and it's as you would expect, because it's Alan Tudyk driving it.
Yeah, I loved the Superman robots are awesome. I love their design. They must be CGI, but they look physical to me. Like, if they're CGI, they're really well lit. Like, the texture looks really good, all of that. And I love the silly characterization of, we have no human emotions whatsoever, but clearly he's a petty little bitch who does,
Yes.
and wants to be called Gary. I love that. All of that is great. Because, like, the Fortress of Solitude is one of those things where, like, we think we know it so well, we've seen it so many times, and this movie managing to come in and make it feel like a fresh version of the Fortress of Solitude with the robots and crypto and the, like, projection that's playing and all of that. Just very smart instincts to do all that.
Yeah, and very appropriately, as in the comic books, because all that kind of stuff is from the comic books. I love that it's called the Fortress of Solitude, and it's anything but. Like, it's nothing
Yes.
that's ever commented on, but, like, it's just is such a crowded place in so many Superman comics, where he's got all these fucking robots, he's got his dog, and he's got, like, these, like, enemies trapped in a fucking interdimensional whatever. It's like, it is the last place on the planet I would go to fucking be alone, is the Fortress of
Yes.
Solitude, because it's just jam-packed with random horse shit. And I like that they represented that in the movie very well.
That's why I think the Supergirl cameo works at the end.
Yeah.
That, like, he gets home and more crazy shit is happening because Supergirl has just landed here. That movie is coming out next year, and that is Millie Alcock, who you might know from House of the Dragon. She plays the young Rhaenyra in the first 5 episodes of that. And I immediately like kind of the direction they're going, where they're clearly doing the more, like... because if you don't know, Kara's backstory is that, like, she is... On Krypton, she was older than Superman,
Yes.
but because of, like, timey-wimey bullshit, she arrives on Earth later, so she is physically younger than Clark Kent, but she has memories of Krypton, so she's much more troubled by losing her home than he ever was. And so they're doing this take on her, and I liked that immediately. I'm excited for that movie. Supergirl's a great character, and I'm glad they're doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And we have Crypto. Let's not forget Crypto. There's no actor to talk about, I guess, because it is a CGI dog, although there was a dog actor named Jolene who stood in on set for Crypto. So Jolene is the actor here. And I love Crypto. I was sold on Crypto beforehand. Crypto clearly, like, I feel like Warner Brothers has to like grant at least half the box office of this movie to Krypto, given how central he was to the marketing. But everyone I've talked to loves Krypto. I took my family to this movie yesterday, and my mom and her husband just howled with laughter every time Krypto was on screen because we're all big dog people, and it's great. I love that Krypto the Superdog is there. I love that he has the cape and it goes completely uncommented upon.
Yes.
I love that he gets the big moment like Hulk in Avengers smashing Loki around where he just grabs Lex Luthor and beats the shit out of him at the end. It's great. Krypto is a very good dog, and I love him.
I mean, Krypto is a very good dog by proof of the fact that Lex Luthor wasn't ripped to fucking pieces. You know, it's like
Yes.
he got away with that with like a couple of cuts and a broken arm or whatever.
Yes.
It's like really realistically, you know, if this was like The Boys Are Invincible, he would have been goops on the floor because Krypto is very strong. He is a very strong boy. Yes, it's just like one of those many things that makes it feel like you're kind of silly comic book version of Superman, but like that's what you kind of need Superman to be for all the other stuff to work. Like for us to believe in the simple goodness of this guy, he kind of needs to live in this crazy world. And yeah, it's just a really well done version of Krypto. You know, like obviously it's a CG dog, and I don't feel like they're ever trying to kind of convince you that it's not a CG dog. You know, like they're kind of happy to let it have a certain amount of uncanniness. They're not trying to make it look perfectly realistic because there's just no way to do that, like for all the stuff that dog needs to do. And so I think they strike the right balance of he always kind of looks like a slightly cartoon character, not like ridiculous. You know, it's not you know, Roger Rabbit or anything, but you know, they're not trying to make him look perfectly photoreal. And I think that was the right choice. That he's got a slight cartoonishness. He's he's more expressive than a dog would be able to be. All those kinds of things. And I think that they've like executed that really well, because I think that's a big like art design and VFX challenge, is exactly what do you do with this super dog that can do super dog shit that also has to be a major focal point of the movie, and how do you realize that on screen and all that kind of stuff. I think they like totally nailed it. And it just is like one of the many things in the movie that's just like a breath of fresh air, that it's something different. It's not the Superman movies that you have seen before. It is looking at and bringing in elements from the larger world of Superman, and it's just done super well.
Absolutely. Speaking of like the characters in the movie, one other one that I want to mention, not necessarily because these are notable actors, because they're more character actors that are kind of unknown, but Jonathan and Martha Kent, Clark's parents. Mm-hmm. I really liked what they did with them. I like that in a movie of lots of larger-than-life, colorful personalities, those are professional actors, but it did kind of feel like they just went and found two people in Kansas to be Clark's parents, and that it is like one of the most grounded versions of the Smallville family that I've ever seen, of just, these are just people from Kansas. And I think it really sells the scenes on the farm. Like, the big heart-to-heart he has with his dad, I think is actually less important a scene for what the dad, like, says with his words than just, like, the kind of body language he and David Corenswet have together, and this sense that they are father and son, and that Clark is really tied to human beings in the world. And I really liked that. And I'm not surprised that James Gunn gave us that, because I think he's very good at anything to do with sort of adoptive found parents. That's what all of his works are about at some point. But I appreciated that side of the movie.
Yes, yeah, it is certainly, you know, when you think about the last Jonathan Kent that we had with Kevin Costner in the Man of Steel, because as I do think it's like important not to cast like super handsome movie star man as Jonathan Kent.
Yes.
You know, like I like Kevin Costner just fine, but you know, like he's a good actor, but he doesn't have the right presence to be the character. And yeah, that I think that like you said with that scene, it's about like his simple connection with his parents, his childhood bedroom that they've kept like that. The phone call he has at the beginning, that is the thing that roots him to the world, because while he is technically an alien from fucking Krypton or whatever, the only life he knows is being Clark Kent and living on Earth as a human being. And yeah, I think like those actors do such a good job of making it feel like we are grounded in a simple place with regular people. And that's where Superman ultimately calls home. And all this other stuff, the magic flying dog and the giant monsters and the robots and all that shit is as fucking foreign to Superman as it would be to anybody, because that's not actually the world that he is from.
Right. Here's a question I had. In all the movie versions of the Superman origin story, Jonathan dies before he becomes Superman. Is that a comic book thing? Is this a retcon that Jonathan is alive? I think it's good. I like that Jonathan's there, but
I feel like he typically is dead before. There have been so many different versions. I think that's from the David Byrne version, which is the post-Infinite Crisis, although I think that would be after Superman the movie, so I don't know where that originally comes from. Okay. But it is definitely like, typically Jonathan Kent is no longer around, is like the classic version I usually think of.
But, like, he doesn't have to be. It's not an Uncle Ben situation where, like, Jonathan's death is what turns him into Superman.
And there are definitely plenty of versions where he's not. I'm pretty sure in the cartoon, I want to say that Jonathan Kent is still alive. I think maybe he dies at some point during the cartoon. But it's not an Uncle Ben thing. It's never really been that.
Yeah. So I was just glad to have them around. And yes, breath of fresh air. I mean, here's a place that really feels like the movie kind of stunting on Zack Snyder, is when Martha Kent is seeing the news report. Well, she actually calls Superman in and says, "You're going to want to see this thing on the box." She sees it, and then she sees the look in Clark's eyes and says, "I'll go get your boots." And it's kind of funny, but also, like, fully supportive, just knowing this is who her son is, and she's not going to try to stop him or anything. Versus in Batman v Superman, where she says, "You don't owe these goddamn people a fucking thing, Clark." Do you remember that, Sean? It's so crazy.
Oh, it's just, I never understood what Zack Snyder was trying to do with the Kents. Like, it just didn't, it's like, what are, like, you know, like, I kind of understand the, like, we want to protect our son, but also that sense of, like, but those humans, they're just not worth it. It's kind of like the feeling they gave. It's like, would you give that speech to your kid if they became a firefighter? You know, it's like, I love you, son, but just keep in mind, those people, you don't owe them a fucking thing. Like, if you feel like, I don't want to go to the fire to this day, fuck them. You don't even think about it. You know, it's just like a really weird attitude to have for your kid who's trying to, like, go out there and do good in the world. It's like, you know, it's like, it's nice, but, you know, it's not that big a deal, kid. You can just stop if you want.
It's the speech that, like, Lex Luthor would give. Like, Lex has the line in this movie, which I like this moment, too, where he says, no, they chose him, they get to die. That's, like, what Martha Kent says about Batman v Superman. I'm like, guys, this is wrong. Anyway, we can stop making fun of the Snyder movies. We probably won't. Anyway, but yes, I like the Kents. And I guess this is where, since we're talking about the parentage, it's worth talking about the big kind of retcon this movie makes, which is that we have the kind of arc for Superman in the movie is that first scene in the fortress, he's getting the message from his Kryptonian parents that is kind of the very typical version of it we've heard from Marlon Brando or whoever plays Jor-El, and then not halfway through the movie, but like the big first to second act turn is Lex and the engineer hacking that message, uncovering the second half, and it being a more sinister, you will be able to take over Earth message, and Clark ultimately having to realize that, as Jonathan Kent says, what you wanted that message to say matters more than what it did say, and him valuing his Earth connections more than anything else. And I like this plot in a lot of ways, and I also, there's a couple ways I think it maybe muddies some of the metaphors, so I'm a little bit of two minds of it. I do really love how it ends. Like, I love that this movie ends with him seeing all the moments of his life in Kansas as the song Punk Rockers plays, which I think is a great needle drop, and I think, like, as an arc for Clark Kent, I actually do think it's smart, and I think it's a cool change of pace for the character. But there are some ways where the way it intersects with some of the politics of the movie doesn't feel quite perfect to me. I'm curious what you made of it, Sean.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Like, I don't have a problem with them changing the classic Jor-El thing. Like, I'm fine with like the Kryptonians being imperialists or whatever. You know, if like that's what they want to do. It's kind of hilariously and appropriately similar to what the Batman does with the Kent or with the Waynes. Right, where Bruce Wayne has to learn that his parents weren't saints, and that, you know, they had their hands in dirty business too, and I think that that's totally appropriate, and it feels like there's a reason why both of the Batman and Superman are doing that, because I think they're like coming into this moment where there are a lot of Americans who are realizing that, like, a lot of the stories they have been fed about the history of the country and like where we're from and all that kind of stuff, that it is not it is not the shining beacon on the hill or whatever, that, you know, it's that America was never quote unquote great for it to be great again, right? Like, I think there's a very clear motivation for why both those movies are doing this, and I think that that's fine. I think the way that this movie is doing it, though, is very clumsy in two ways. One way is just, I think, the way they sell it on screen is kind of just doesn't quite work, or it feels a bit like muddled and confused, specifically on the whole, like, did Lex Luthor fake it or was it real? Which the movie is very insistent that it is real, but I don't think it does. It insists that it's real in a way to make it feel real to the audience. Like, I think there's something that just, I spent the whole movie in the back of my head being like, but are they going to reveal that it was fake? Because there's something about, one, that obviously that is the thing that Lex Luthor would do. Like, that's just any version of Lex Luthor, particularly this version of Lex Luthor, would manipulate that information and twist it in a specific way to make it seem terrible. Like, I kept on in the back of my head thinking that the twist would be that, like, it was maybe translated in a way that made it feel really fucked up, whereas it was maybe a more positive or whatever. That like he had manipulated it in some way that other people couldn't detect. But the way the movie tries to sell you that message is definitely not faked or manipulated at all is just Mr. Terrific telling that to you because he knows the guys who did the thing, and those guys wouldn't fuck it up or whatever. And that's just like a really terrible way of selling it to the audience. Is not only is it being exposited to us by a character himself who's not directly involved in this. He was not at the Fortress of Solitude. He hasn't intersected the Lex Luthor plot at all, but he's doing it by referring to other people that we haven't seen or anything. Like, it's just as like, it feels like a late addition to the script or something, of like, people were confused of whether or not the thing was real or not. So we have to add another thing to tell them. Because obviously at a certain point, Lex Luthor is talking to somebody else and he says that it wasn't faked in a way that is the thing that most was. I was like, okay, I guess it is really real, because he would have no reason to lie to the dictator guy or whatever it was.
He's walking through the pocket universe, and he does that. Because, like, if you wanted... I think Mr. Terrific being the person to confirm it makes sense if Mr. Terrific did an independent analysis of it, right? Like, if you had Mr. Terrific come in, typing away, and going, I'm looking at it right now, Superman, and I'm seeing it's real. Like... it might be a little clunkier or something. Like, I don't think you could build in a scene where he goes to the Fortress of Solitude and independently analyze, because the movie doesn't have time for that. But, like, you need a little bit more than... Because I agree. I had the same feeling of, like, what is the reveal going to be? And it really wasn't until Lex says it independently, just off the cuff, that I believed Lex. And I think that scene comes too late in the movie past that reveal.
I mean, I do think they could have had when Superman goes to the Fortress of Solitude and he learns that Crypto has been taken and all that stuff. I know that, like, what happens in the movie is that the consoles are destroyed or whatever, so he presumably can't see the message. But I feel like I would have had him watch the message that has now been fixed.
Yes.
And in that moment, and have the actual revelation fully sink in for him at that point, that it is really real. Because I think that's one of the other things I had a hard time dealing with, was it felt like Superman accepted the fact that it's real so easily that it was just like, that it was really hard to buy that whole element, and it just felt super clunky.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, like, I respect the hell out of this movie being 129 minutes, I want to be clear, and I think it's very good at balancing its time. I think if you had to add 5 minutes to this movie for the scene you're mentioning, I think that would be a worthy reason to push this to, like, 133 minutes or something. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just, like, it's such an important part of the movie, because it's a linchpin to his overall character arc, and it's part of something that, when I get into some of my other criticisms with the third act, it's part of the thing that makes the third act fall a little flat for me, is I think, like, this part of his character arc just gets fumbled a little bit. But then there's the other thing with the politics, and I assume that you're probably thinking something similar along the lines of me. I think there's something that gets super muddled with specifically the immigrant allegory or metaphor here, where you're like, the movie wants to have its cake and eat it too by having Superman get to have this, like, whole journey of learning that it's not about where I come from, it's what I do. You know, it's not about my destiny, it's about my choices in my life, which is a good arc to go on. But when you mix that with, also, a lot of this movie is about, like, American fear of immigrants and stuff like that, and it's like the whole thing that Lex Luthor plays off of, and part of the what it feels like Lex Luthor's whole thing is sort of like racism, is this fear of immigrants, and this like the classic fear of immigrants, whether you're talking about modern America or anything, is the like immigrants coming over to our country and like subverting American values and infiltrating
race mixing. It's specifically the race mixing stuff, because it's all of the harem and the breeding things that is what he's afraid of. Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, this is like, this is so old school. I mean, if you go back to like Dracula, this is what Dracula's about. Like, there's a reason why the first thing Dracula does when he comes over to London is he seduces Mina Harker and turns her into a pseudo vampire. It's like it's the immigration paranoia thing. And it's like the problem with doing that and doing the Superman story arc at the same time is you are making Lex Luthor right. Like, his paranoia is correct. Superman was sent here to overthrow America, to sleep with, like, or to overthrow the Earth, sleep with Earth women. Like, that is why his parents sent him here. That is why he's here. But don't worry, the thing that Lex Luthor doesn't understand is good old classic Midwestern American values. And of all that Superman is, because Superman has been properly integrated into American society, well, then now he's not a problem, because now he's a proper American. Like, I don't think the movie's trying to say that, but it is kind of what the movie ends up stumbling into, is this other version of the American story that has this kind of really fucked up implication and fucked up subtext to it about like the people who come from that. America is great because it is a country that people immigrate to, and it's the country built up of immigrants, but also there's that subtext of, but we got to wash them of the country and the culture and that they came from and turn them into proper Americans, and that is the thing we have to do. And I think the movie ends up stumbling into that in a way that is super awkward.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, I don't think it's a huge issue with the movie, because overall, I like just the fact that it is a Superman movie that is like very engaged with all of these questions, and like when you're playing this hard with allegory, there's no version of this that doesn't have something that is like a cross-wired at some point. And so I would much rather they swing for the fences and get something wrong than not do it at all, right? Like, so I want to be clear about that. But I agree with your general criticism. That's what I was thinking, because I think there is a lot of bite, and I was surprised to see the movie go here, of having Lex just do the race mixing thing and talk about harems and all of that. Like, there is very real bite and very real reflection of actual, like, MAGA, current day talking points on all of that. I just think when you also have it be something that is in the message, like, here's how I honestly would have squared the difference, is have the message be somewhat nefarious, like they did intend for him to lord over humans, but then Lex extrapolates the harem thing. Like, that's how I would have written it if you had to do those two things. I think the problem is that the recording literally has the thing about take many wives, and I think that's proving Lex too right. Like, I think it needs to be something more nebulous and like not clear, because the movie does also have a thread that I think is very smart of saying, people don't need to be perfect to be worthy of salvation. Countries don't need to be perfect for their people to be worthy of being saved. Like, Clark says this to Lois in that interview, where she points out that, like, hey, Jarhanpur has its problems with government, and he's saying that's immaterial to the people, and whether or not I'm going to save them. And that is, like, a very common talking point with, like, Gaza Hamas or whatever, right? Yes. And, like, I think that's a very important thing that the movie says. And I think even saying that the idea that, like, any religion or background people come from can have something nasty in it that we aren't comfortable with should not affect our ability to see that they are able to, be great people in the here and now. I think all of that is something the movie is trying to go for. And I do think it's where there needs to be a couple of moments where the thing around the message is massaged, the writing is a little different to kind of clear, because this is a complicated allegory the movie's trying to draw, and I think there just needed to be a little more massaging in different places to hit all of those nuanced points I think it is actually trying to get at, if that makes sense.
I think the movie's heart is in the right place, but I think it does get a little bit muddled. It feels a bit like naive American, right? Like, it feels like something that wasn't actually written by an immigrant, it feels like someone who hasn't actually struggled with that specific issue, and so it ends up falling into this very like Americanized kind of old school perspective on it. That again, I don't think the movie's like saying with its whole throat or whatever. But I also think like the movie doesn't have like an answer to the immigration themes. They just kind of end up fading away at a certain point because the movie doesn't know what to do with it because it has become this muddled ball. And it's sort of like, and then it moves on to other stuff.
I mean, it's more full-throated in stuff like the way the prisons are being used,
yes.
the way they show aliens being rounded up. There's a really great shot when they get out of the pocket universe, and it's this slow-mo shot of Metamorpho running into the darkness with his baby that I think is a very politically loaded shot. Like, that's where the movie, I think, has its teeth and is able to fully express, because Metamorpho isn't tied to any of this. Like, and they show Metamorpho going back and watching TV with presumably his, like, wife or girlfriend who is human, and showing that he is someone who has to live in the shadows but is also part of this community. All of that stuff works great. But yeah, it's a place where, because I completely see why James Gunn makes the retcon that he does, because also doing the whole thing with the idea that Superman's Kryptonian birth parents had more nefarious means, that is so in the James Gunn wheelhouse. Every movie he's ever made is about people having tensions and sometimes very real trauma with their birth parents or the people who raised them, and having to accept a found family or something in the here and now as their actual source of strength. That is every character in Guardians of the Galaxy. That's all over the Suicide Squad. That is everything that Peacemaker is about. And so I understand, like, that is the story he tells, and every auteur at some point has the story they tell. But it is where you can see the movie. And again, these are problems of ambition, which are so much better than problems of laziness to talk about. But that is where there's a few too many maybe thematic goals being serviced at the same time without enough massaging to make it all work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. What else to discuss with the movie? We haven't actually talked about the other superpowered beings he fights. We have the engineer character who has the nanites, and then we do have Ultraman. I like that right off the bat we're into him fighting clone Superman. I think that's fun. I do think the CGI of it looks like they're putting David Corenswet's head on a double's body, and it's the worst CGI in the movie. Like, I think most of the time the effects in this movie are pretty good, especially compared to like Marvel stuff now. Like, the big kaiju sequence looks great, all of that stuff. I do think like the David Corenswet's head looks very awkwardly photoshopped onto that body, but I do like that we got to ultimate comic book. We're just fighting ourselves right off the bat.
Yes. I mean, so, but here is also, like, one of my issues with the movie. It revolves around these characters, specifically so-called Ultraman, if you let him use that name. But, yeah, so they do the clone Superman thing, which they telegraph super early when they get into the Fortress of Solitude. And as soon as that happened, I had a thought in my head. I was like, oh, it's clone Superman. And I was like, and my thought was, it's clone Superman because it's okay to kill the clone. And when you get to the end of the movie, he throws that clone right into a fucking black hole. And so like, one of my issues with the movie is I don't particularly like the action climax in the third act, and the way all that works out. And I do think there's a certain part of the movie that loses sight a little bit of those themes of that, like, Superman's the guy who goes and saves the squirrel and all that kind of shit. And it's like, it's interesting to me that, like, really this movie's answer to the problem of how does Superman deal with a foe that is as powerful as he is not different than Man of Steel's. It's just presented in a different way, right? Man of Steel makes a huge moment of Superman consciously makes this choice to kill Zod and snap his neck. And, he's, I'm so tortured by my need to have to kill this man to stop him. Without finding another way to solve the problem. And I was really bummed out that this movie, I think, does cop out in two major ways. One of them being Superman does just fucking chuck that dude into a black hole. And it really feels to me that the clone thing is he's a clone so we can kill him. Because if that was a regular other person, if it was just another guy who had Superman-like powers that was from fake Israel or whatever, I think that people probably would notice more the notion of Superman has just yeeted that dude, presumably to his death. We don't see him die. They don't tell us that he's dead, but he does get thrown into a black hole. I get that the guy is a clone of Superman, but they have created stakes earlier in the movie where Superman almost falls into a black hole, implying that doing so would likely kill Superman. So I feel like you're meant to understand that dude is either dead or he's going to be saved for a future movie and turned into Bizarro or something. And he's another dimension, whatever. But if they do that. But there is this sort of like disappointment at like they didn't find a way for Superman to solve that problem with anything other than effectively just killing this dude using violence. And the other place where I do think the movie also cops out is having Hawkgirl kill the dictator guy because Superman couldn't do it. So we just don't have Superman there, so that another character that we're okay with killing people, which, to be fair, Hawkgirl will murder a motherfucker. Like, her power, she can fly and she's got a fucking mace. So there's not a lot she can do other than fucking kill people. There's not a lot of subtlety to Hawkgirl's power set, is what I'm saying. But I do think it's a bit of a cop-out of the movie where I think Superman believes all the things that Superman says, but it doesn't always feel like the movie really believes him. And I don't know if the movie is always like with Superman there. And I kind of wish that the movie took a different direction with how it dealt with some of the action stuff. And I have other problems with just like the pacing and the style of the action generally in that last section. But those two things are my other kind of big issues with the movie, is that kind of what felt like a cop-out in how it resolves those elements.
Interesting. So I actually do agree with what you say about Hawkgirl and the dictator. I do think that feels like it's not, again, it is not making Superman kill that guy, obviously. And it's not out of character for Hawkgirl necessarily, but it does feel like just a little wrong for the movie. If for no other reason, then I do think like Superman would be the kind of guy to say this person should like stand trial for his crimes against humanity. Like, they're obviously, if we're assuming this is our Benjamin Netanyahu stand-in, is there a very real catharsis to watching a girl in a hawk mask drop him off a fucking roof and to his death? Yeah, there's catharsis to that. But the point of Superman is that he's the better angels of our nature, right? Yeah. Who would say, as much as we might like to watch Benjamin Netanyahu fall to his death, it would be more worthy to humanity to watch him stand trial for his many, many, many crimes, right? And something like that. So, yeah, and that's a tough one because it is a different character, but I agree. I think the movie is too flippant about that in a way that I'm uncomfortable with. The thing with Ultraman, I hadn't even really thought. Here's the thing.
Yeah,
I guess the clone thing does work because I hadn't even really thought. I mean, it's so played like he's a robot that I hadn't even really thought of it in those terms. So I guess I do think execution matters, and the fact that, like, Man of Steel is, if you're talking about execution, is way more blatant about this, in that is a close-up, long scene, agonizing, killing him in a truly, like, brutal, violent way. In this case, it is Superman throwing him off and he gets hit by the bus and dragged down. It's not Superman himself physically throwing him into the black hole. It is the effect of his actions. But there is a longer, more complicated chain to talk about there. And I think I probably agree that I would prefer a version of this movie where he finds a way to knock that dude out, and then we see him, I don't know, floating in a tank at the Fortress of Solitude or something. Like, I don't know what it would be. But, some comic book bullshit, right? It did not ultimately bother me, and I think I mostly like all the climax stuff, so I'm good with it. But I think I understand where you're coming from on it.
Yeah, I just think I got kind of bored by the action at the end of the movie. I think there's I think it avoids doing the sky laser superhero ending by doing the fissure in the ground superhero ending, right? It's got the same, there's this kind of abstract series of kind of ticking time bombs that what the superhero is doing in this moment is kind of tangentially related to. And I think it's not good at actually building up and relieving the proper tension that it's trying to set up. It's a big muddled action climax, which is, the vast majority of these superhero movies, even lots of other ones that I really like, have this exact problem. It's for whatever reason, it is the thing that so many superhero movies fall into. But I do think it just gets very tedious where the actual threat of the scene is meant to be this big fissure opening up, but the huge majority of the scene is just spent Superman fighting other people, and that's just something that's vaguely happening in the background. There's no plan for how to deal with that. It's not clear how they're going to deal with it. It just is, Mr. Terrific is supposed to be dealing with that problem. He's just off screen for 10 minutes in a row. There's just a sense of, it's a lot of different ideas for an action climax that have been thrown together, but it doesn't feel like it really kind of resonates with the themes of the movie particularly strongly, which is partially the I'm going to just yeet this clone into a black hole and not think about it. Hey, it's a clone. Fuck it. It's a clone. Don't have to worry about it. The clones don't count is I guess Superman's motto. But then also there's all this other stuff going on in the action scene, technically, that is not balanced particularly well. And then that culminates in the confrontation between Superman and Lex, which I also found to be a bit underwhelming, which we commented on earlier. We're talking about Lex Luthor, but I didn't feel like that sequence... It didn't feel like it sort of was that huge swell where all the themes of the movie properly came together. It still felt like it was a big muddle to me, and that's probably my biggest criticism with the movie, is I just think that stuff, a lot gets lost in the midst of the action climax of this film, I think.
So I like the Lex Superman scene at the end. That worked for me. But I will agree with you on because it has, the action climax has a deadline structure of the rift heading towards the populated part of Metropolis that didn't evacuate, right?
Yeah.
And that's a fine idea for an action scene. It's a clear deadline thing, right? I do agree that I think there's too much in there to work with the deadline structure. Like, my particular criticism structurally would be there are two action scenes embedded in that overall sequence. There is Superman versus Angela the engineer and Ultraman before we know he's the clone, and that starts at the baseball stadium, and then it's him where he does the big fly up and comes back down, and then there is his final confrontation with Ultraman, the clone. And I think Gunn needed to pick one or the other. I think that is where, like, the movie feels... the movie never feels overstuffed to me in the number of characters or any of that stuff. I love all that. It does feel overstuffed with action there, where I think both of those action scenes have some really good stuff to them. I like how this movie is shot an awful lot. I like how it depicts the superpowers. I think the whole way it shows the desperation of Superman in the scene where his lungs are being filled, just flying up until he reaches escape velocity, and then coming back down and forcing them to let go. I like the idea of that a lot, and I think it is a very tense sequence. But I also feel like when that ends, if that scene ended with both Ultraman and Angela knocked out in the sewers, and Superman went over and pulled off Ultraman's mask and saw it was a clone, and then had the same interchange he has with Lex over the communicator, and then goes and fights Lex, but we didn't have another Ultraman fight, I would be fine with that. I think that would actually be totally fine as a conclusion to that sequence, that he does beat the two of them by doing something crazy and unpredictable that only he can do, and then we move on. I think that would probably be sufficient. I do like the bit in the middle of it where they send in all the, like, raptor forces, and we see Superman doing the I can dispatch with this very easily, where he just spins crazy and does that. I love that. That's a great, like, visual live-action version of his powers. But yeah, I do just think like it is two big action set pieces embedded within one larger action set piece, and I do agree that it muddles the deadline structure that the overall set piece is going for, and that is where the movie, maybe we could have lost a couple minutes there and gained a couple of minutes of him alone in the Fortress of Solitude reckoning with the message that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, because I think the other thing is, I think the movie's really in love with the whole notion of Lex voice command controlling Ultraman, which is something where I think one thing, if they wanted to eat Ultraman into a fucking black hole, just make him a robot. He doesn't need to be a clone. If you made him a robot, I would have less of a problem with it, because that would also make more sense with them giving voice commands. But I do think part of the problem is because that sequence is so long, like... And Superman's solution to dealing with it is Krypto goes in, plays fetch with the cameras, which is, that's fine. That was set up earlier with the Mr. Terrific balls or whatever. It's, there's no necessarily big problem with that. But I do think because there's so much time spent on it and there's so much action there, it's like, does Superman really need Krypto to do that? Like, he's Superman. Can't he just eye laser the fucking cameras? I wouldn't, normally that would not bother me all that much. I think it's one of the problems with doing action with Superman can be hard because he can do so much. But I think it's because there's so much of it at the ending. It does get really exhausting that when the solution to it is so mundane and feels like Superman, if this is what the solution is to being able to beat this thing, Superman should have been easily able to deal with that a number of different ways. Like the Krypto answer is not a particularly clever or interesting answer to that problem. I think it's one of the other things that makes the action feel very tedious, is it just is not particularly creative,
Not as tedious, though, as the hour-long destruction of Metropolis in Man of Steel.
No. Yes. If we're grading on a curve, we're still way, way, way ahead of Man of Steel. But the one thing I think the action climax could have used a bit more is IHOP product placement. I think that would have just really sealed the deal and tied everything together. If I could have just had an IHOP in the background of a couple shots, it really would have made Metropolis feel like a real place to me.
I'd forgotten about how much of that is in Man of Steel. Oh my, you're right, but I had forgotten that. Yeah.
It's my
crazy.
prevailing mental image of that movie is one, Superman snapping Zod's neck, and two, Superman fighting the Kryptonians, and there's a big IHOP in the background.
I think they're in the IHOP for part of it. Like they
do
crash
go
into
the
it
IHOP,
and then,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, yes. So, no, I think I generally agree. I do like some of the Lex fighting with, like, the codes, and, like, when he's talking to Superman through the communicator and he's writing them down and, like, showing them. I think some of, like, the cutting there and the way it, like, uses kind of the rhythm of the scene I like a lot. And the fact that it feels like Lex... I think it's a good characterization moment for Lex of how you're seeing he is getting to live vicariously his fantasy of beating up Superman. I do actually, the more we talk about it, the more I am convinced... Yeah, if I think Ultraman should have just been a robot, I would have been totally fine with that. I thought he was a robot for most of the movie, frankly, because he starts in the big suit of armor, and then he's just a dude in the, like, black costume. I think if he would have been a robot, and I think we're okay with Superman killing a robot.
Yes, as long as it's clear
okay.
The robots doesn't have, like, a personality, that it's just a receptacle for commands from Lex Luthor, then yeah.
Okay, but Ultraman also doesn't have a personality, and it's just a receptacle for commands from Lex Luthor. So what's the line here, Sean?
Well, he's clearly, if he's an organic or, like, entity, he has the potential for free will. Like, he could, like, he's not just a machine. He's a fucking living, breathing organism. It is
I guess. The movie doesn't really get into that.
If he is a clone of Superman, he's no different than Superman. Like, Superman throwing him into the black hole is no different than someone throwing Superman into a black hole. It's like he's the same kind of being as Superman is. If you're okay with killing fucking Ultraman, you should be okay with killing Superman. That's all I'm saying.
Speaking of the black hole, I do want to say this movie has, in addition to all the other comic bookiness of it, it has a couple of moments that look more like comic book panels than anything I've ever seen in a movie. There's two in particular. One, you were talking about the black hole, reminded me of this. It's when they're escaping the pocket dimension, and he's got the baby, and you've got Metamorpho in his, like, head tentacle form, and you've got Crypto there, and they're all going down the, like, Proton River, and it is particularly the moment at the end where Superman gets swung around by Tentacle Metamorpho and then blows with his, like, his powerful breath, his super breath, and it is that slow-mo shot of him pushing them all back away from the black hole across the Proton River. That I can so easily see as a giant, like, spread from a 70s weird-ass comic book. I kind of loved that shot. Yeah. And then also, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Clark and Lois have their talk after he's gone to try to find Crypto, and you have the extra-dimensional imp, they call it, which looks like a big jellyfish outside the window in the skies that the Justice Gang is taking care of, and that whole conversation happens with this, like, neon color show happening outside the windows. One of my favorite, like, uses of comic book mise-en-scène in a movie is that scene, because it just so feels like something you would see. I can just imagine, like, the texture of the color on the paper for that scene in a comic book, and I James Gunn's very good at that kind of thing, but I really loved that here.
Yeah, I particularly like the Lois Lane scene, where I think I could just see in my head, like, an early to mid 2000s Superman comic, and it just being one full page with like probably 4 or 5 long horizontal panels going down in sequence like that. So it's like the panels are the full width of the page and just going down. It really captures that energy and seeing that, like, the weird fight in the background in the middle. You're right that has a particular kind of comic book framing to it. That's really well done. Yeah.
And then another conversation I have with this movie is that this is the sort of official start. It's kind of weird because DC have been in such a weird place, but this is more or less the beginning of the new DCU. Some of the stuff James Gunn's already made is kind of grandfathered in, like Peacemaker, who got a cameo. I did like the Peacemaker cameo. I thought that was funny. That was a good use of a comic book cameo. But yeah, this is the beginning of our new James Gunn DCU. Things we have on the offing in the near future. We've got the Supergirl movie about this time next year. We have Peacemaker Season 2 later this year. And we have the Lanterns show, I think, early next year, and that's an HBO show. And then there's some other movies and stuff they're working on, but they're not doing like the Marvel thing of announcing 7 things with release dates right off the bat. But I think this is a really good start. I'm excited to see more. I think if you've got this tone, you've got some of these characters fleshed out, it feels like there's a lot of directions to go. And I also think this paints a picture of how you can do more DC stuff where you don't have to be doing the Marvel thing of building to a big crossover to just have the world be alive and have people kind of flit in and out of it. And I like that. And I am definitely excited to see more from DC in the future.
Yeah, I'm curious, what they're going to do. Like, I'm definitely not, I didn't watch this movie and come out feeling like, and I'm going to watch every single thing they do. That's it,
right. But I don't think it's asking you to either, right? Like, exactly. Like, I'm glad that it's not feeling like it's sort of telling you that you need to go watch the Lantern show and this thing and the other thing. Like, there are enough little connections that there's something for you to follow if you want to. But there's no implication of like, and here's Darkseid on the other end of this portal or whatever. And, right.
I mean, they very well could eventually do that. I have no idea where they're going to go with it. But yes, but it's the thing that's nice about this movie. It's a very good movie that feels like it's a movie, like it doesn't feel like it's a thing that, okay, now I have to go watch that TV show before I go watch this other movie, this, that, and the other thing. It is not a movie that's giving you homework to go do.
Exactly. And I think that's the right balance to strike. I think from what we've seen from the James Gunn, Peter Safran sort of regime so far, they're not doing the Marvel thing of planning 7 movies for 5 years and announcing them all ahead of time and then making them. Like, they're making stuff as they have scripts, and I think that's the right way to do it. And I think these projects sound interesting. Like a Supergirl movie, I know technically one exists, but we pretend it doesn't. And I think making a Supergirl movie it looks like it's based on some of the more recent runs of that character, which sounds fun. I think doing some of this on TV is a great idea. Like, I think the Lanterns show sounds so much more interesting to me than doing a Green Lantern movie and having it be like Hal Jordan and he goes to space and fights some big alien. This sounds fun. So I'm into all of that. Here's something I wanted to say, though. I see absolutely no reason why the Batman, the Matt Reeves stuff, and this Superman can't be in the same DC universe. They are so... I know they're tonally very different because in the way Batman and Superman are always tonally different, but like, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, I would argue James Gunn's Superman and Matt Reeves' Batman are equally comic booky, just in different flavors of comic booky.
Yes.
And there's nothing... I'm not saying I need a Justice League movie tomorrow with them, but the idea that you need to do a separate Batman for this DCU is silly. Like, I could totally imagine the Robert Pattinson Batman and the David Corenswet Superman meeting someday. Like, they feel very simpatico to me. Like, they feel coherent as part of a vision for what DC should be in a way I really like. In a way that reminds me of, like, the Batman animated series and the Superman animated series in the 90s.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree. Like, because I think, like, you want... If you're doing your world's finest Superman and Batman crossover kind of thing, you want that contrast. Like, you want Batman to be kind of dark and gritty and fucked up, and Superman to be bright and hopeful and optimistic, because that's the thing that makes that pairing so fun and dynamic and interesting. And if they, because I know that they've said they're making that Batman the Brave and the Bold or whatever, that they want to do a different Batman for this. And I think, like, the instinct of we have to make a more silly version of Batman that's a bit more kind of, Silver Age-y or whatever, or, potentially Adam West-esque or whatever the direction they're going to take with it, in order to have him sit in the same universe as Superman is the wrong idea. I think I don't need them to say, and the Batman is going to be in the same world as, unfortunately not titled The Superman. That would have been a fun title for this movie. But, I don't necessarily need them to do that crossover. But I also don't want them to have a different live-action Batman while they're still making more Robert Pattinson version. Like, fucking pick a lane. Either stick with Robert Pattinson. If you want to have a Batman in your DC universe thing, well, then bring him over. Or don't make more of those movies and do a different Batman, if you guess. I like the Robert Pattinson one, so I don't want them to do that. But the notion of them doing 2 Batmans at the same time just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either. I will say, to play not devil's advocate, because I don't think James Gunn is the devil. I think he's very smart. The pitch for The Brave and the Bold isn't necessarily that it's a silly version of Batman. Okay, the TV show aside that is called The Brave and the Bold, that is the silly version of Batman. The movie, I think it's less a tonal thing than that they want to do the Bat family, because their whole pitch with The Brave and the Bold is that it was going to be a more established Batman who has had like a Nightwing and stuff, and it's the Damian Wayne Robin was going to be the whole thing. And it sounds like Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson might be more resistant to that. And I am sympathetic to the view of James Gunn wanting to do, if you're going to have Batman in your DCU, do it with the Bat family. And if it comes to having the awkwardness of two Batman, but we finally get a fucking Bat family movie, I guess I will take that trade. I just think, like, you could make it all work. I would like to see the Robert Pattinson Batman have a Robin at some point, all of that stuff. But there is also the question of the Batman Part 2 is taking forever to make, because Matt Reeves has had some, we don't really know, but some behind-the-scenes turmoil. I think he might have had a health event or something. I don't want to like delve into his personal life. And I'm glad that they are giving him the space he needs to make the movie. That's the right instinct. But we'll see. I think the question of Batman in this universe is an open thing. I think James Gunn, and he's even been kind of clear in interviews about this, isn't quite sure what they're going to do with it. And that's fine. They can figure that out down the road. But yeah, for now, I do think this is a very good start, and I will say, between, you know, this and the Batman and the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and some of the recent James Gunn stuff, DC is in a much, much healthier place than it was the last time we got a Superman movie. That's for fucking sure.
Oh, God, yes. I mean, fucking, you know, it's just, they really went through the ringer.
Yeah.
With all that. Like, it almost feels like it was like a weird dream. Even though it's not that long ago, you know, that Flash movie is only a couple years old.
Yeah.
But like, it is like, it's just crazy thinking about the fucking train wreck of, you know, they made a fucking Justice League movie and then they made a different Justice League movie and put out that different one, you know, like it's what a weird world we were living in there. But it turns out, you know, again, like it's the thing that's nice about the Superman movies. It just feels like, not to say that they didn't work hard on this and do a lot of good hard work, but it feels like it just shows us like, it doesn't have to be that complicated to make a fucking Superman movie. You can make a Superman movie. It's okay, guys. And that's something that's like very nice about this, is it doesn't feel like it is carrying all these like pretensions and all this weight of it's got to be a Superman movie, and then eventually we have to have a Justice League movie. You know, it's like, no, we can make a Superman movie, and maybe someday we can make a Justice League. I don't know. And I like that energy that this new version of the DC movies have.
Honestly, I think that's part of why James Gunn did the Justice Gang in this, is to just take the air out of that balloon and just, for this first movie, it's kind of the opposite of the Avengers Initiative moment in Iron Man. Instead of going, we're going to have a big interconnected universe now, it's saying, the universe is already interconnected, and it's kind of goofy, and it's fine. We'll move on. And I think that's absolutely the right call right now.
Yes. It makes you very curious what they're like longer term plans are, right? Because obviously they're sort of putting in places, you know, these sort of like individual pieces in place. But I'm looking at the Wikipedia. They have called this Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters. It makes me curious, like, what is the notion of like, what would a Chapter 2 be, and how do you transition from a Chapter 1 to a Chapter 2? Like that kind of longer term stuff. That's obviously far off in the future. I'm just kind of curious where that will go, because it's a very promising start. But we have seen how these cinematic universes can go awry in very many different ways.
Last question for you, Sean, since you are the comic book expert here and a passionate Superman fan, what would you want to see in a sequel to this movie, based on what this movie did well, what you like in Superman? Like, where do you think would be a cool direction for them to go?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, like this is not for a sequel to this movie, but it would be nice to eventually have a good version of your Death and Rebirth of Superman type stuff. I don't want the second Superman movie to be that, to be clear, but like eventually, which is funny because that is what they did the last
Man
time.
of Steel, yes.
They did have the second Superman movie that was also a Batman movie be the Death of Superman. You know, but like obviously that's like your like kind of bigger picture, long game kind of stuff. It'd be fun to eventually build up to that. It would be fun to, you know, they had your interdimensional imp line. It would be with the
Mr. and Mrs. Pitlick.
Yeah, it would be fun to have Mr. Mix's Pitlick and do some stuff with that. They've got, man, it's been a while since I did Superman stuff. I'm trying to remember. There's one character who has like, it's like Absorbo or something, who can absorb powers. That I always remember from the Superman cartoon being a fun one because you can do a lot of interesting stuff with that. And then I would love to see them kind of like build out the Lex Luthor character. You know, Nicholas Hoult in prison. There's some stuff from All-Star Superman you could pull from that. That would be very fun to do as well, with Lex Luthor in prison and Clark Kent having to go visit him. If you kind of pulled some of the ideas from that chapter from All-Star Superman into a movie, that would work like incredibly well as like a big second act scene. But yeah, I don't have like a clear, like, this is the Superman story they need to adapt. Because I don't think they need to adapt a specific Superman story. I think they should look at like, what are some of those characters that are out there, and then like what is the next step for this Superman now that he has kind of had this kind of notion of that big mantle taken off his shoulders. He doesn't have to be the angel from another planet. Like, how does he then interface with like the other superheroes and start kind of like build up maybe a superhero community with the Justice Gang and all of that? And what is like the big challenge that would have to face? That would probably be the direction I would take another movie in.
I do feel like Mr. Mxyzptlk feels like the final boss for James Gunn's career of like, you made Rocket Raccoon and Groot household names. You made Peacemaker like the cornerstone of the DCU somehow. You did fucking Crypto the Superdog and Mr. Terrific here. Like, now can you conquer Mr. Mxyzptlk and make that a thing like my mom knows about?
Yeah.
That is, because like my mom, who now knows and loves Rocket Raccoon and Mr. Terrific, will in 5 years she know Mr. Mxyzptlk. I do think that is the ultimate test for James Gunn's career. I would love to see it. That would be awesome. And we'll see. This is interesting stuff going on in DC. But that is it for now for Superman. We will probably be back either later this month or early August to talk about Fantastic Four, the First Steps movie that is coming out, and see if Fantastic Four hopefully can have its own moment of finally getting it right. If so, this would be a big month for superhero movies. But you know what? We got Superman, and for now, I'll take that. I'm a very happy Superman fan right now.
Yes, and so am I. It is a good day to be a fan of Superman.